She's my wife, not your bargain. Those 5 words shattered a tyrant's dreams in the dust of Wyoming, 1876. Eleanor Price stood on an altar built for betrayal, a deed in one hand and desperation in the other, until a dusty cowboy rode into her nightmare with a wedding ring and a loaded revolver. This is the story of a girl sold for soil, a man who refused to let evil win, and a love forged in gunfire and grit. Stay until the end, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The Wyoming wind had teeth that October morning, sharp enough to cut through Eleanor Price's worn wool shawl as she stood on the porch of her father's ranch house. Her ranch house now, though the ink on William Price's death certificate had barely dried. The sprawling valley before her should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like a noose tightening around her throat. She was 20 years old, alone, and about to lose everything. The horses came at dawn, 6 of them, kicking up dust devils that swirled like angry ghosts across the dried prairie grass. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the porch railing, her knuckles going white as the riders approached. She didn't need to see the lead rider's face to know who it was. Silas Blackwell always announced himself like a plague, slowly, inevitably, with the promise of suffering in his wake. "Miss Price." Blackwell's voice was smooth as whiskey and twice as poisonous as he dismounted, his boots hitting the packed earth with the weight of a man who'd never been told no in his entire life. He was 50, if he was a day, with silver threading through his dark hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. His suit was tailored, his gloves were leather, and his intentions were written plain as day across his weathered face. Behind him, 5 men sat astride their horses, hired guns with dead eyes and quick hands. They weren't cowboys. They were predators in human skin, and Eleanor knew exactly why they were here. "Mr. Blackwell." She kept her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I wasn't expecting company this morning." "No?" He tilted his head, that reptilian smile widening. "That's peculiar, Miss Price. I sent word 3 days ago that I'd be coming to collect." "Collect?" The word tasted like ash in her mouth. "Your father's debt." Blackwell reached into his coat and withdrew a folded piece of parchment, yellowed and official-looking. Signed and witnessed. "William Price owed me $12,000. Money I lent him to keep this ranch afloat after the drought of '74. The agreement was clear. If he couldn't repay by the 1st of October, 1876, the land would transfer to me." Eleanor's stomach turned to ice. "My father never mentioned any debt." "Your father was a proud man." Blackwell climbed the porch steps uninvited, and Eleanor found herself backing toward the door despite her determination to stand her ground. Pride makes men do foolish things, like borrowing money they can't repay, like dying and leaving their only daughter to clean up the mess. The cruelty in his voice was casual, practiced. This was a man who'd crushed people before, who knew exactly how much pressure to apply before they broke. "I don't believe you." Eleanor's hand found the door handle behind her back. "My father kept meticulous records. There's no mention of any loan in his ledgers." "Then perhaps you should look more carefully." Blackwell unfolded the document and held it up, close enough that Eleanor could see her father's name scrawled at the bottom in what looked like his handwriting, but something about it made her skin crawl. The letters were too careful, too deliberate. Her father's hand had been steady but quick, shaped by years of riding in moving wagons and on horseback. This signature looked like someone had traced it slowly, painstakingly. "This is a forgery," she breathed. Blackwell's smile didn't waver. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Price. One you'd need proof to substantiate." "Do you have proof?" She didn't. That was the hell of it. Her father's papers were in order, his accounts balanced to the penny, but there was no proof of what wasn't there. No way to prove a document was fake without evidence of the real transaction it was meant to replace. "I didn't think so." Blackwell folded the paper and tucked it back inside his coat. "Which brings me to why I'm here. The debt is due. The land is forfeit. However," he paused, letting the word hang between them like a dangling rope. "I'm a reasonable man. I'm prepared to offer you an alternative arrangement." Eleanor's blood ran cold. She knew what was coming. She'd known since the moment she'd seen him riding up with his vultures in tow. "Marry me," 2 words. Simple. Devastating. Marry you, Eleanor repeated, her voice hollow. At sundown tomorrow. Blackwell's gloved hand rested on the porch railing, possessive, as if he already owned everything his fingers touched. A simple ceremony. The preacher's already been paid. Your father's debt will be forgiven. The land will remain in your name, technically. Of course, as your husband, I'll manage the property. Make the decisions. You'll want for nothing, Eleanor. You'll have security, protection, a name that means something in this territory. And if I refuse? His smile finally faded. Then my men will escort you off this property by noon tomorrow. The land transfers to me, the house becomes mine, and you'll leave with nothing but the clothes on your back. Winter's coming, Miss Price. A young woman alone, with no family, no money, no prospects. He let the implication twist in the air like smoke. Well, I imagine that would be a very difficult winter indeed. Eleanor's vision blurred at the edges. This couldn't be happening. Her father had built this ranch from nothing, had poured his blood and sweat and soul into every fence post, every acre, every dawn breaking over the mountains. This land was his legacy. It was all she had left of him, and this monster wanted to take it by buying her like livestock. I need time to think, she managed. You have until sundown tomorrow. That's all the time you need. Blackwell tipped his hat, a mockery of courtesy. My men will remain nearby to ensure you don't do anything foolish, like trying to run or seeking help from the marshal. His eyes hardened. Marshal Boone is a good friend of mine, Miss Price. Very good friends. He won't interfere in a private business matter between gentleman and lady. The threat was clear. She was alone, trapped. And tomorrow she would become Mrs. Silas Blackwell, or she would become nothing at all. Blackwell descended the steps and mounted his horse with practiced ease. I'll see you at the altar, my dear. Wear something pretty. The riders turned as one and galloped away, leaving Eleanor standing on the porch of the house that would soon belong to a man she despised. The dust settled slowly, coating everything in a fine gray powder that tasted like defeat. She didn't cry. Not yet. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, Eleanor turned and walked inside, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. The house felt different now, smaller, darker, as if Blackwell's presence had poisoned the very air. She moved through the parlor like a ghost, her hands trailing over the furniture her father had built, the curtains her mother had sewn before the fever took her 8 years ago. Everything here was memory. Everything here was love. And by tomorrow night, it would all belong to a monster. Eleanor sank into her father's chair by the fireplace, the leather still holding the shape of his body, and finally allowed herself to look at the truth square in the face. She had no options. No money to hire a lawyer, no family to turn to, no way to fight a man with Blackwell's resources and connections. The law was on his side. Power was on his side. She pulled out her father's last letter, the one he'd written 3 days before he died, when he knew the pneumonia would take him. Her fingers traced the familiar scrawl. Eleanor, my girl, you're stronger than you know. When the wolves come, and they will come, remember that strength isn't about fighting every battle. Sometimes it's about knowing when to bend so you don't break. But never, never let them take your soul. The land is yours by right and by blood. Don't let anyone tell you different. Your father, who loves you beyond measure, William Price. Bend so you don't break. But how could she bend without breaking completely? Marriage to Silas Blackwell would be a living death. She'd seen the way he looked at her, the way his eyes catalogued her like property. He didn't want a wife. He wanted an acquisition, another trophy to hang on his wall next to all the other things he'd stolen or bought or destroyed. The fire had burned down to embers. Eleanor fed it fresh logs, watching the flames catch and grow, and wondered if her father had known this was coming. If he'd suspected Blackwell would make his move the moment William was in the ground. Probably, she thought bitterly. Her father had always said Blackwell was a snake who smiled while he struck. The afternoon dragged into evening. Eleanor tried to eat but couldn't stomach more than a few bites of bread. She tried to sleep but lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl around the eaves like mourners at a funeral. Her funeral. That's what tomorrow would be. Around midnight, she finally drifted into an uneasy doze, her dreams full of dark figures and signatures written in blood. and woke to the sound of someone knocking on her door. Eleanor sat bolt upright, her heart pounding. The knocking came again, soft but insistent. Not Blackwell. He would have pounded like he owned the place. Not his men. They would have just kicked the door in. This was something different. She grabbed the rifle her father kept beside the fireplace and moved to the door, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "Who's there?" "Jack Rowan. Miss Eleanor." The voice was low, rough-edged with exhaustion. "Your father's friend. I heard what Blackwell's planning. I need to talk to you." Jack Rowan. The name stirred memories. A young cowboy her father had hired 5 years ago. A drifter with a quick smile and honest eyes who'd worked the ranch for 2 seasons before moving on. Her father had spoken highly of him, had said Jack was the kind of man you wanted at your back when trouble came calling. Eleanor cracked the door open, the rifle still in her hands, and found herself looking at a man who'd aged since she'd last seen him. He was maybe 25, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His clothes were dusty from hard riding, and there was a weariness in his eyes that spoke of too many miles and not enough rest. But when he looked at her, there was no predation in his gaze, just concern and determination. "I'm sorry to wake you," Jack said, his hands raised to show he was unarmed, or at least that he wasn't reaching for the revolver on his hip. "But I rode 2 days straight when I heard what was happening. Can I come in?" Eleanor studied him for a long moment, weighing trust against desperation. Then she stepped back and opened the door. Jack entered, removing his hat and turning it in his hands, a nervous gesture that somehow made Eleanor trust him more. Men with bad intentions didn't fidget. "I was in Cheyenne when I heard," he said without preamble. "Ran into Hank Mercer at the saloon. He said William Price had died, and that Blackwell was circling your ranch like a buzzard. I got here as fast as I could." "Why?" Eleanor set the rifle aside, but kept it within reach. "You haven't been here in 3 years. Why come back now?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Because your father saved my life once, and because letting Blackwell do this to you would be a sin I couldn't live with." "Saved your life?" "Winter of '73. I got caught in a blizzard up in the high country, nearly froze to death. Your father found me half buried in snow, brought me back here, nursed me through the fever that followed. Didn't ask for anything in return, just said—" He paused, swallowing hard. "That's what decent people do, son. They help when they can." Eleanor remembered that winter, remembered the stranger in the guest room, remembered her father spending nights by his bedside, making sure he didn't slip away. "He never told me he saved your life," she said softly. "He wouldn't. That wasn't his way." Jack met her eyes. "But I owe him a debt I can never repay. And I owe you the truth. Blackwell's agreement is a forgery. Your father never borrowed that money." Hope flared in Eleanor's chest like a struck match. "How do you know?" "Because I was here in '74, during the drought. I saw your father's books. I helped him keep this place running when money was tight. He was too proud to borrow, said debt was a trap that crushed more men than drought ever did. He'd never have signed that paper." "But I can't prove that," Eleanor said, and the match guttered out just as quickly. "Blackwell has a document with my father's signature. Without proof, it's forged. Then we don't fight him on the forgery." Jack's voice was steady, certain. "We fight him on different ground." "What do you mean?" Jack took a breath, and Eleanor saw him brace himself like a man about to jump off a cliff. "Marry me instead." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and absurd. Eleanor actually laughed, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. "Marry you? I don't even know you anymore, Jack. It's been 3 years." "I know." He held up a hand. "I know how it sounds, but hear me out. Blackwell wants the land. He's using marriage as a legal way to get it. But if you're already married to someone else, then his whole plan falls apart. The debt becomes mine to manage as your husband. He can't force you to the altar if you're already spoken for." Eleanor stared at him, her mind racing. It was insane. It was desperate. It might actually work, she breathed. "It will work," Jack corrected. "But only if we do it tonight, before he comes back tomorrow. We find a justice of the peace, get married legally, and when Blackwell shows up with his preacher, you show him the marriage certificate." "And you do this?" Eleanor searched his face for deception, for hidden motives. You'd bind yourself to a stranger just to stop Blackwell? You're not a stranger. You're William Price's daughter, and your father told me once that sometimes the right thing and the hard thing are the same thing. Jack's voice softened. I won't lie to you, Miss Eleanor. I'm not offering romance. I'm not even offering a real marriage. Just a legal one. On paper. To protect what's yours. And what do you get out of it? He smiled, sad and small. The chance to sleep at night knowing I didn't stand by while a good man's daughter got sold to a devil. Eleanor closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she would marry Silas Blackwell and lose everything that mattered. Or tonight, she could marry a virtual stranger and maybe, save her father's legacy. It wasn't a choice. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. All right, she whispered. Let's do it. Jack's shoulders sagged with relief. There's a justice of the peace in Silver Creek, Judge Abraham Potter. He's honest, doesn't ask questions, and he owes me a favor. We can be there and back before dawn. What about Blackwell's men? You said they're watching. They're watching the main road. We'll take the back trail through the canyon, the one your father showed me during that blizzard. It's rough going, but we'll make it. Eleanor looked around the parlor one last time, at her father's chair, her mother's curtains, the life she was about to gamble on a desperate plan, and a cowboy's promise. Give me 10 minutes to change, she said. She rushed to her bedroom and pulled on riding clothes, practical pants and a sturdy shirt, boots that could handle rough terrain. She tied her dark hair back and grabbed her father's old coat, the one that still smelled faintly of tobacco and saddle soap. When she emerged, Jack was waiting by the door, his face set with determination. You sure about this? He asked one final time. Eleanor thought of Blackwell's smile, thought of her father's letter, thought of the land that held every memory she had left of the people she loved. I'm sure. They slipped out the back door into the October night, moving quietly toward the barn. Jack had already saddled 2 horses, his own rangy Mustang and her father's old bay mare, steady and sure-footed. They mounted in silence and walked the horses slowly away from the house, not daring to break into a run until they were well clear of any watching eyes. The moon was a silver sliver in a sky crowded with stars. The trail Jack led her down was barely visible, winding through stands of pine and across rocky ground that would hide their tracks. Eleanor's heart pounded with every hoofbeat, certain that at any moment they'd hear shouts behind them, or gunfire, But nothing came. Just the wind and the night and the rhythm of the horses moving through darkness. They rode for 2 hours, mostly in silence. Eleanor found herself studying the man ahead of her, trying to reconcile her vague memories of a young ranch hand with this weathered cowboy who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to pray. Why'd you leave? She finally asked, her voice barely carrying over the sound of the horses. 3 years ago. You were here, and then you weren't. Jack didn't turn around, but she saw his shoulders tense. Your father told me to go. What? Why? Because He trailed off, then seemed to force himself to continue. I had feelings for you, Miss Eleanor. You were 17 and I was a drifter with nothing to offer, and your father saw the way I looked at you. He pulled me aside one night and said, Jack, you're a good man, but you're not ready to be the man my daughter needs. Go find yourself, make something of your life, and if you're meant to come back, you will. Eleanor's breath caught. I didn't know. You weren't supposed to. Your father was protecting you, and he was right. I wasn't ready then. I was just a kid playing cowboy, running from a past I didn't want to face. Jack glanced back at her, his eyes unreadable in the darkness. I've spent 3 years working ranches, saving money, trying to become someone worth something. Guess I'm about to find out if I succeeded. Before Eleanor could respond, the lights of Silver Creek appeared ahead, a scatter of yellow windows in the darkness, a town that never quite slept because the saloons stayed open and the miners worked all hours. They rode down the main street, ignoring the curious stares from the few people still out at this late hour, and stopped in front of a modest house with a sign that read, Judge Abraham Potter, Justice of the Peace. Jack dismounted and helped Eleanor down, his hands steady on her waist. For just a moment, they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the determination written in every line of his face. Last chance to change your mind, he murmured. Eleanor squared her shoulders. Let's get married. Jack knocked on the door, 3 sharp raps that echoed in the quiet street. Footsteps sounded inside, and then the door opened to reveal a short, round man in a nightshirt and glasses, holding a candle that cast strange shadows across his face. Jack Rowan. Judge Potter squinted at them. Good Lord, boy, do you know what time it is? Late enough that I need your help, Judge. Jack removed his hat. This is Eleanor Price. Her father just died, and there's a man trying to force her into marriage tomorrow to steal her land. We need you to marry us tonight, legally and binding, so she's protected. The judge studied them both with sharp eyes that belied his sleepy appearance. That's a serious accusation, son. Forcing a woman into marriage. It's the truth, Eleanor said, finding her voice. His name is Silas Blackwell. He claims my father owed him money, but the debt is forged. He's given me until tomorrow sundown to marry him or lose everything. Potter's expression darkened. Silas Blackwell. I know the name. Know his reputation too, and it's not one that inspires confidence in his honor. He stepped back, opening the door wider. Come in. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. The inside of the judge's house was cluttered but comfortable, filled with books and papers and the smell of pipe tobacco. He led them to his study and began pulling out forms, his nightshirt flapping around his knees as he moved with surprising efficiency. I'll need witnesses, he said. Mrs. Potter, he called toward the stairs. Sarah, get down here. We've got a wedding to perform. A woman's voice floated down, thick with sleep. Abraham Potter, if this is another one of your jokes. No joke, dear. Legal matter, urgent. Footsteps on the stairs, and then a woman appeared, gray-haired and formidable in her dressing gown, with eyes that immediately assessed Eleanor and Jack with the precision of a schoolteacher facing new students. Well, she said after a moment, you look like you're either running from something or running toward something. Which is it? Both, Eleanor said honestly. Mrs. Potter smiled. Good answer. Abraham, get your Bible. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. The next 15 minutes passed in a blur. The judge threw on a coat over his nightshirt. Mrs. Potter lit candles around the study until the room glowed with warm light, and somewhere in the chaos, Eleanor found herself standing next to Jack in front of a makeshift altar, really just the judge's desk cleared of papers. Judge Potter opened an worn leather Bible and looked at them both seriously. Marriage is a sacred bond, not to be entered into lightly. I understand the circumstances that bring you here tonight are unusual, but once I pronounce you husband and wife, it's legal and binding in the eyes of God and the Wyoming Territory. Do you both understand? Yes, sir, Jack said. I do, Eleanor whispered. Then let's begin. Potter adjusted his glasses. Do you, Jack Rowan, take this woman, Eleanor Price, to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live? Jack turned to face Eleanor fully, and in the candlelight, his eyes were steady and honest. I do. And I make this vow. I'll protect what's yours with everything I have. I'll stand between you and anyone who tries to take what you've earned. I'll honor your father's memory and the land he built. That's my promise, Eleanor Price. Eleanor's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. This wasn't the wedding she'd imagined as a girl. No white dress, no church full of family, no romance or passion. Just a desperate bargain made in the middle of the night. But somehow, Jack's words meant more than any flowery speech could have. And do you, Eleanor Price, take this man, Jack Rowan, to be your lawfully wedded husband? Judge Potter continued. To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live? Eleanor took a shaky breath. I do. And I promise. Her voice cracked, and she had to start again. I promise to trust you with my father's legacy, to stand with you against whatever comes, and to never forget that you chose to help when you didn't have to. Then by the power vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, Potter said solemnly, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jack, you may kiss your bride. Jack blinked, clearly not having anticipated this part. Is that necessary for the legal? It's traditional, Mrs. Potter said with a small smile. but not required. Eleanor and Jack looked at each other awkwardly. Then, in a moment of impulse she'd question later, Eleanor rose on her toes and pressed a quick, chaste kiss to his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, for his ears only. His hand found hers and squeezed once, gently. "We're going to beat him, Eleanor. I swear it." Judge Potter had them sign the marriage certificate, Eleanor Price and Jack Rowan, witnessed by Abraham Potter and Sarah Potter, dated October 10, 1876, at 1:30 in the morning. The judge used his official seal, stamped the document twice, and handed them a copy. "Keep this safe," he said, "and if Blackwell gives you trouble, you send for me. I'll testify to the validity of this marriage in any court in the territory." "Thank you, Judge." Jack shook his hand. "I won't forget this." "See that you don't." Potter's expression turned serious. "And Jack, you've taken on more than legal papers tonight. That woman is your responsibility now. Don't make me regret helping you." "I won't, sir." They left the judge's house as husband and wife, the marriage certificate tucked safely in Jack's coat pocket. The moon had set, and the sky was beginning to lighten in the east, dawn approaching faster than Eleanor would have liked. They mounted their horses and began the ride back, and this time Eleanor rode beside Jack instead of behind him. Partners now, legally bound, facing an uncertain future together. "What happens when we get back?" she asked as they climbed back into the hills. "We wait for Blackwell to show up with his preacher," Jack said, "and then we show him the marriage certificate and tell him the wedding's off. He won't take it well." "No, he won't." Jack's hand drifted to the revolver at his hip. "Which is why I'm going to be right next to you when we tell him. Let him try something, please. I'd love an excuse." There was steel in his voice that hadn't been there before, and Eleanor realized that Jack Rowan might look like a cowboy, but he was something more, something harder and more dangerous than she'd given him credit for. They made it back to the ranch just as the sun broke over the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. Eleanor's home had never looked more beautiful or more worth fighting for. They put the horses in the barn and walked to the house together. At the door, Jack paused. "You should try to get some rest," he said. "It's going to be a long day." "Where will you sleep?" "I'll keep watch. Make sure Blackwell's men don't try anything before sundown." Eleanor wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her bones. She nodded and turned to go inside, then stopped. "Jack?" "Yeah?" "Why did you really come back? The truth." He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the rising sun. "Because 3 years ago, your father told me that a man's worth isn't measured by what he has, but by what he's willing to sacrifice for what's right. I've been trying to become that man ever since, and when I heard what was happening to you..." He finally looked at her. "I guess I wanted to find out if I'd succeeded." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. Not quite trust. Not yet love, but the beginning of something that might become either or both given time. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "I think my father would be proud of you." Jack's expression flickered. Surprise, gratitude, determination. "Then let's make sure we don't let him down." Eleanor went inside and collapsed on her bed, still fully dressed, the marriage certificate crinkling in her pocket. She closed her eyes, expecting nightmares of Blackwell, and guns and loss. But instead she dreamed of her father standing in a field of wheat, smiling at her across the distance. And beside him, barely visible in the golden light, stood a young cowboy with honest eyes and a promise to keep. When Eleanor woke, the sun was high and the house was filled with the smell of coffee. She stumbled to the kitchen and found Jack at the stove, cooking bacon and eggs with the ease of a man who'd spent years fending for himself on the trail. "Afternoon," he said with a small smile. "Figured you'd need your strength." "What time is it?" "Near about 3 o'clock. Blackwell will be here in a few hours." Eleanor's stomach churned, but she forced herself to eat. Jack was right. She needed her strength for what was coming. They didn't talk much as they ate, but the silence was companionable rather than awkward. Jack cleaned up while Eleanor changed into her mother's best dress, dark blue with ivory lace, the one she'd worn to church before the fever took her. It felt like armor now, a reminder that she came from strong women who didn't break easily. When she emerged, Jack had changed too, into clean clothes, his dark hair combed back, his gun belt buckled around his hips. He looked every inch the cowboy, but there was something else in his bearing now. Authority, purpose. "You ready for this?" he asked. "No," Eleanor admitted. "But I'm doing it anyway." They walked out to the porch together and waited. The sun crawled across the sky with agonizing slowness, shadows lengthening across the valley as the afternoon wore on toward evening. And then, precisely at sundown, the horses came. Blackwell rode at the head of his men, and behind them came a buggy carrying an elderly preacher who looked deeply uncomfortable with the whole situation. The little procession stopped in front of the house, and Blackwell dismounted with the confidence of a man who'd already won. "Miss Price," he said, removing his hat in a mockery of respect, "I trust you've had time to consider your position. Are you ready to become Mrs. Blackwell?" Eleanor stepped forward, and Jack moved with her. Not in front of her, not behind her, but beside her, a united front. "There won't be a wedding today, Mr. Blackwell," Eleanor said, her voice carrying clear across the yard. "There already was one." Blackwell's smile faltered. "I beg your pardon?" "I said there was already a wedding." Eleanor held up her left hand where a simple gold band now circled her ring finger, one of Jack's own rings, hastily resized that afternoon with pliers and patience. "Last night, I married Jack Rowan, which means your agreement is void." For 3 long heartbeats, Blackwell didn't move. Then his face went through a series of transformations: confusion, disbelief, and finally, rage. "You married a drifter?" His voice cracked like a whip. "A nobody? A man with nothing to his name?" "I married a good man," Eleanor corrected. "One who doesn't need to forge documents and threaten women to get what he wants." Jack's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "She's my wife, not your bargain." And that's when Silas Blackwell's careful facade finally shattered completely. The color drained from Silas Blackwell's face, then flooded back in a dark crimson that spread from his collar to his hairline. His hands, still holding his hat, began to tremble. Not with fear, but with a rage so profound it seemed to radiate from him like heat from a forge. "You," he said, his voice low and deadly, "have made the greatest mistake of your short, insignificant life." Jack didn't flinch. He stood his ground, one hand resting casually near his revolver, his body angled slightly in front of Eleanor in a way that managed to be both protective and respectful of her autonomy. "The only mistake here is yours, Blackwell. You came onto this property with lies and threats, and you're leaving with nothing." "Nothing?" Blackwell's laugh was brittle as breaking glass. "You think a hastily scribbled marriage license changes anything? I own the debt. The land is mine." "The land," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut, "belongs to me. And any debts my father allegedly owed died with him, unless you can prove they existed in the first place." "I have proof." Blackwell reached into his coat and yanked out the folded document, shoving it toward them. "Right here, signed and witnessed." "By who?" Jack interrupted. "Show me the witness signatures." Blackwell's hand froze. His eyes darted to the paper, and Eleanor saw the moment he realized his mistake. There were no witness signatures. He'd been so confident that a terrified young woman would simply fold under pressure that he hadn't bothered to make the forgery complete. "The witnesses," Blackwell said slowly, "are respectable men who can testify. Then bring them forward." Jack's voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath. "Right now. Let's hear them swear under oath that they watched William Price sign that paper." The silence that followed was deafening. Blackwell's men shifted in their saddles, exchanging glances. The preacher in the buggy looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world, and Blackwell himself stood there, his face contorting as he realized the trap closing around him. "You planned this," he hissed, pointing a shaking finger at Eleanor. "You and this vagrant conspired to what?" Eleanor took a step forward, and she felt Jack tense beside her, ready to intervene if Blackwell made any sudden moves. "To protect what's legally mine? To refuse an unwanted marriage? To question a suspicious debt that appears nowhere in my father's meticulously kept records?" She raised her chin. "If that's conspiracy, Mr. Blackwell, then I'm guilty as charged." Blackwell's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment. Then he turned to his men. Thompson, ride to town and fetch Marshal Everett. I want this fraud investigated immediately. One of the hired guns, a lean man with a scarred face, hesitated. Boss, the marshal's in Laramie. Won't be back for 3 days. Then fetch the deputy? Deputy's with him. Eleanor watched Blackwell's composure crumble in real time. He was a man accustomed to having systems in place, people he could call on, power he could leverage. But out here, miles from town with the sun sinking below the horizon, he was just a man, and she was standing on her own land with a husband beside her and the law, the real law, on her side. This isn't over, Blackwell said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more frightening than his rage. You think a piece of paper protects you? You think this boy can stand against me? He looked at Jack with undisguised contempt. I've destroyed better men than you, Rowan. I've buried ranchers and cattlemen and anyone else who stood in my way. You're nobody. Nothing. And when I'm done with you, there won't be enough left to bury. Then you'd better bring more men, Jack said quietly. Because these 5 won't be enough. The hired guns stiffened. One of them, a heavy-set man with cold eyes, let his hand drift toward his gun. You got a lot of mouth for someone who's outnumbered. 6 against 2 ain't outnumbered, Jack replied, his tone almost friendly. It's a massacre waiting to happen. Question is, which of you wants to be the first to die? Because I guarantee you, Blackwell's not worth it. Whatever he's paying you, it ain't enough to stop a bullet. The tension ratcheted up another impossible notch. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the scene unfold like a powder keg waiting for a spark. The hired guns were sizing Jack up, calculating odds, and she could see the moment they registered something in his stance, his stillness, his absolute lack of fear, something that made them reconsider. Stand down, Blackwell snapped at his men, though his eyes never left Jack's face. We're leaving, but this conversation is far from over, Mrs. Rowan. He spat her new name like a curse. You've bought yourself a few days at most, and when reality comes crashing down, when you realize that playing house with a drifter won't save you from what's coming, I'll be waiting, and I won't be offering marriage next time. He jammed his hat back on his head and mounted his horse in one violent motion. His men followed suit, and within moments, the entire group was thundering away from the ranch, leaving a cloud of dust and unspoken threats hanging in the air. The preacher, forgotten in his buggy, cleared his throat nervously. Should I still send you my bill for services, Mr. Blackwell, or... Go! Blackwell roared without turning around, and the preacher snapped his reins, his buggy rattling away after the departing riders. Eleanor and Jack stood on the porch, watching until the last rider disappeared over the ridge. Only then did Eleanor allow herself to breathe, really breathe, for the first time since Blackwell had arrived. That, she said shakily, could have gone worse. Could have gone better, too. Jack's hand finally left his gun, but his body remained taut with tension. He meant what he said, Eleanor. This isn't over. I know. She turned to look at him, this man who was now her husband in the eyes of the law, this stranger who'd put himself between her and danger without hesitation. What you said to his men, about 6 against 2 being a massacre, were you bluffing? Jack met her eyes, and for the first time she saw something dark and haunted in his gaze. No, I wasn't. Who are you really? You're not just a cowboy. He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as if deciding how much truth to share. Then he sighed and leaned against the porch railing, suddenly looking much older than his years. During the war, he said slowly, I rode with Quantrill's raiders for about 6 months. I was 16, didn't know any better. Thought I was fighting for something that mattered. By the time I realized what we really were, bandits and murderers with a Confederate flag for cover, I'd already done things I can't take back. He stared out at the darkening valley. After Quantrill was killed, I drifted. Worked ranches, kept my head down, tried to become someone different. Your father was the first person who looked at me and saw something worth saving. Eleanor absorbed this confession, feeling the weight of it. Does that mean you're fast? Yeah. Jack's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. Faster than anyone Blackwell's likely to hire. But speed doesn't mean I want to kill anyone, Eleanor. I left that life behind. I'm trying to stay behind. But you'd do it, she said softly. If it came to that, to protect the ranch. To protect you. He looked at her then, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. That's what I promised. In front of Judge Potter. In front of God. I meant every word. Blackwell comes back with violence. I'll meet it. But I'm praying to whatever's listening that it doesn't come to that. Eleanor reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on the railing. His skin was warm, calloused from years of hard work, and she felt him tense at the contact before slowly relaxing. Thank you, she said, for everything. For coming back, for marrying me. For standing with me against him. Jack turned his hand over, palm up, and carefully folded his fingers around hers. We're in this together now. For better or worse, remember? For better or worse, she echoed. They stood there as the stars began to appear, two people bound by necessity and desperation, holding hands on a porch, while somewhere in the darkness, their enemy plotted revenge. That night, Eleanor insisted Jack sleep in the guest room rather than keep watch outside. You're exhausted, she argued when he protested. And if Blackwell's smart, he'll wait before making his next move. He needs time to plan, to figure out how to counter what we've done. We have at least tonight. Reluctantly, Jack agreed. Eleanor showed him to the small room where her father had nursed him back to health 3 years ago, providing clean blankets and a basin of water for washing. The door locks from the inside, she said, lingering in the doorway. And my room's just down the hall if you need anything. Eleanor, Jack caught her wrist gently as she turned to leave. Are you all right? Really? She considered lying, putting on a brave face, but something about the genuine concern in his voice made her tell the truth. I'm terrified, she admitted, not just of Blackwell, but of everything. This marriage, this situation, the fact that I'm gambling my entire future on a plan that might fall apart at any moment. I keep thinking about what happens if this doesn't work. If Blackwell finds a way around the marriage, or bribes the right people, or just... She trailed off, unable to voice the darker possibilities. Then we fight harder, Jack said simply. We find another way. We don't give up. He squeezed her wrist once, gently, then released her. Your father didn't raise a quitter, Eleanor, and I didn't marry one either. Despite everything, she smiled. Good night, Jack. Good night, Mrs. Rowan. The name still felt strange, foreign, but Eleanor found herself not entirely hating the sound of it. She retreated to her own room and changed into her nightgown, then sat at her father's desk and pulled out his ledgers. If Blackwell's document was a forgery, and she was certain it was, then the proof had to be somewhere in these pages. Her father had documented every transaction, every expense, every cent that came in or went out. If he'd borrowed $12,000, it would be recorded. She spent hours combing through the neat columns of numbers, tracing expenses back through the drought years, looking for anything that might explain where Blackwell's fictional debt had come from. And slowly, a pattern began to emerge. In the summer of 1874, during the worst of the drought, her father had sold off nearly half his cattle at rock-bottom prices. The money had kept the ranch running, but barely. Then, in September of that year, there was a notation. Sale of North grazing rights to S.B. 800. Eleanor's blood ran cold. S.B. Silas Blackwell. She flipped forward through the pages, and there it was again. Renewal of grazing rights lease, 800, September 1875. Her father hadn't borrowed money from Blackwell. He'd leased grazing rights on the northern section of the property, the rocky, less desirable land that wasn't good for much except letting cattle roam. A simple business arrangement, fully paid, with no debt attached. But it gave Blackwell something. A connection to the property. A paper trail that could be twisted and manipulated. With the right forgery, he could transform a grazing lease into a loan, transform $800 into $12,000, transform a legal business arrangement into a weapon. Eleanor's hands shook as she realized the depth of Blackwell's deception. He hadn't just forged a random debt. He'd built his lie on a foundation of truth, making it that much harder to disprove. She needed more evidence, something concrete that would prove the debt was false. The answer came to her suddenly. Her father's bank records. William Price had banked at Cheyenne Trust and Loan, and they would have documentation of every deposit and withdrawal. If her father had borrowed $12,000, it would show up there. And if it didn't... Eleanor made a note to wire the bank first thing in the morning. It would take time to get a response, but it was evidence Blackwell couldn't forge or manipulate. Bank records were sacrosanct, witnessed and verified. She fell asleep at the desk, her head pillowed on her father's ledgers, dreaming of numbers and signatures and justice. Morning came too early. Eleanor woke to the sound of roosters and the smell of coffee, again, and found Jack already up, dressed, and cooking breakfast. "Don't you ever sleep?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "Habit from the trail, sun's up, I'm up." He slid a plate of eggs and toast in front of her. "You were up late. Find anything useful?" Eleanor told him about the grazing lease, about her theory of how Blackwell had twisted a legitimate transaction into a fraudulent debt. Jack listened intently, his expression growing darker as she spoke. "So he used your father's honesty against him," he said when she finished. "Built a lie on top of a truth." "Exactly. Which means we need bank records to prove the loan never existed. I want to send a wire to Cheyenne this morning, request copies of my father's account history." "Good idea. I'll ride with you into town." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Jack's voice was firm. "Blackwell knows where we live, but he doesn't know what we're planning next. If he's got men watching, I want them to see we're not hiding, we're not scared, and you're not alone." They rode into Silver Creek together, side by side on the same trail they'd traveled 2 nights before as strangers. Now Eleanor was hyper-aware of Jack's presence beside her, the easy way he sat his horse, the constant scanning of the horizon, the way his hand never strayed far from his gun. "You're expecting trouble," she observed. "I'm expecting Blackwell to be watching. Whether that translates to trouble depends on how stupid his men are feeling today." They reached town without incident, though Eleanor noticed the stares they drew from passers-by. News traveled fast in small communities, and by now, everyone probably knew that William Price's daughter had married a stranger in the middle of the night to avoid Silas Blackwell's machinations. The telegraph office was a cramped building that smelled of dust and metal. The operator, a wizened old man named Thaddeus, peered at them over wire-rimmed spectacles as they entered. "Mrs. Price, or should I say, Mrs. Rowan, now." His voice was creaky but kind. "Heard you got yourself hitched. Congratulations, I suppose." "Thank you, Thaddeus." Eleanor pulled out the message she'd written that morning. "I need to send this to Cheyenne Trust and Loan. It's urgent." Thaddeus read the message, his eyebrows rising. "Requesting account records? That'll take a few days at least, maybe a week. How much to market priority? Double rate. Done." Eleanor counted out the coins from her small purse. Thaddeus began tapping out the message, the clicking of the telegraph key filling the small space. Jack stood by the window, watching the street with the stillness of a man who'd learned patience in dangerous places. "Sent," Thaddeus said finally. "They'll wire back confirmation when they receive it. Check back tomorrow afternoon." As they left the telegraph office, a voice called out from across the street, "Well, well, if it ain't the blushing bride." Eleanor's stomach sank. 3 of Blackwell's men were standing outside the saloon, the same ones who'd been at the ranch yesterday. The one who'd spoken was Thompson, the lean man with the scarred face. "Keep walking," Jack murmured, his hand drifting toward his gun. But Thompson and his companions were already crossing the street, spreading out to block their path. People on the boardwalk scattered, sensing violence in the air. "Heard you two had quite the romantic wedding," Thompson continued, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Middle of the night, no guests, no celebration, almost like you were trying to hide something." "Almost like it's none of your business," Jack replied evenly. "See, that's where you're wrong, friend." Thompson stopped about 10 feet away, his thumbs hooked in his belt. "Mr. Blackwell makes it my business to keep an eye on you two. Make sure you don't do anything foolish, like sending telegrams." One of the other men, the heavy-set one from yesterday, grinned nastily. "Who you wiring, Mrs. Rowan? Lawyers? More family? Someone you think can help you?" Eleanor's blood ran cold. They'd been watching, waiting. "Last I checked," Jack said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "Sending telegrams wasn't illegal in Wyoming territory." "No, but fraud is." Thompson took a step closer. "Entering into a sham marriage to avoid legitimate debts, that's fraud." Mr. Blackwell's got lawyers looking into it right now. Could be you two are looking at jail time. Then let his lawyers come talk to us. Jack's hand now rested openly on his revolver. But you three? You're just hired muscle, and you're in our way. The street had gone silent. Shopkeepers stood in doorways, watching. A woman herded her children inside the general store. Everyone knew what was about to happen, or thought they did. Thompson's smile widened. You really think you're fast enough to take all three of us, boy? I think, Jack said calmly, that I don't need to be fast enough to take all three. I just need to be fast enough to kill you first. And I am. So the question becomes, is Blackwell paying you enough to die for him? The certainty in Jack's voice was absolute. This wasn't bravado or bluffing. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with the cold precision of a man who'd killed before and would do it again if necessary. Thompson's smile faltered. Eleanor saw the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of money against mortality, pride against survival. This ain't over, Thompson finally said, taking a step back. Never thought it was. Jack's hand remained on his gun. But it's over for today. Now move. For a long, tense moment, no one breathed. Then Thompson jerked his head at his companions, and the three men stepped aside, letting Eleanor and Jack pass. They walked to their horses in silence, mounted up, and rode out of town at a measured pace, not running, not hurrying, but not dawdling either. Only when they were a mile outside of Silver Creek did Eleanor finally speak. They were waiting for us, watching the telegraph office. Yeah, Jack's jaw was tight. Which means Blackwell's got eyes everywhere. We need to be more careful. More careful? Eleanor's voice rose with stress and frustration. Jack, we can't even send a telegram without being threatened. What are we supposed to do? We keep going, keep fighting. He glanced at her and his expression softened slightly. I know it's hard, Eleanor. I know you're scared. But we can't give up now. That's what he wants, to make you feel helpless, isolated, like there's no way out except surrender. Maybe there isn't, she whispered. Jack pulled his horse to a stop and reached out, catching her reins. Listen to me. Your father fought droughts, disease, financial ruin, and every other damn thing this territory could throw at him. And he survived. That strength is in you, Eleanor. I've seen it. The way you stood up to Blackwell yesterday, the way you're fighting for what's yours, that's your father's legacy. Don't let Blackwell take that from you too. Eleanor felt tears prickling at her eyes and angrily wiped them away. I'm trying, Jack. God knows I'm trying. I know you are. His voice gentled. And you're not doing it alone. That's why I'm here. That's what the marriage means beyond the legal protection. You have someone at your back now, someone who won't run when things get hard. Promise? The word came out smaller than she'd intended. Promise. They rode the rest of the way home in thoughtful silence. When they reached the ranch, Jack insisted on checking the property, the barn, the outbuildings, the perimeter fence, looking for signs of tampering or surveillance. Blackwell might try to sabotage something, he explained. Make it look like an accident. Fire in the barn, spooked cattle, poisoned water. We need to stay vigilant. Eleanor helped him search, and they found nothing suspicious, but the very act of looking made her realize how vulnerable they were. Two people against a wealthy man with unlimited resources and no scruples. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Jack finally asked the question she'd been dreading. What happens if the bank records aren't enough? If Blackwell's paid off the right people or found some other way to make his story stick? Eleanor had been thinking about that all day. Then we need something bigger, something he can't bribe or manipulate his way out of. Like what? She took a deep breath. We expose him publicly. Show everyone in the territory what kind of man he really is. Make it impossible for him to operate in the shadows. That's dangerous, Eleanor. Men like Blackwell, when you back them into a corner, they come out swinging. I know. But what choice do we have? We can't live like this, constantly looking over our shoulders, waiting for him to make his next move. She turned to face Jack. You said your father saved your life once, that you owed him a debt you could never repay. Well, here's how you can pay it. Help me destroy Silas Blackwell. Jack studied her face in the fading light, and something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. All right, But we do this smart, methodical. We gather evidence, build a case that's airtight, and we find the right person to bring it to. Someone Blackwell doesn't own. Marshall Boone? Maybe. I don't know him well enough to trust him yet. Jack thought for a moment. But Judge Potter might. He performed our marriage. He knows what Blackwell was trying to do. Let's start there. Over the next 3 days, they fell into a routine. Jack maintained the ranch, feeding cattle, mending fences, doing the 1,000 small tasks that kept a property running. Eleanor went through her father's papers with renewed intensity, documenting every interaction with Blackwell, every payment made, every piece of correspondence. And at night, they sat together in the parlor and planned. Jack told her everything he knew about Blackwell's operations, which ranches the man had absorbed, which families he'd driven off their land, which debts were legitimate, and which were manufactured. Eleanor took notes, building a web of connections and victims. If we could find other people he's done this to, she said on the third night, people who'd be willing to testify. They'd have to be brave, Jack interrupted, or desperate. Blackwell's got a long reach and a longer memory. Anyone who speaks against him risks losing everything. Like us. We've already lost everything if this doesn't work. That makes us dangerous. On the fourth day, they rode back to Silver Creek to check for the telegraph response. Thaddeus handed them a thick envelope with a knowing look. From the bank, he said. Came in this morning. Hope it's what you're looking for. Eleanor's hands shook as she opened it. Inside were copies of her father's account records for the years 1873 through 1876, every transaction documented with dates and amounts. She scanned through them right there in the telegraph office, her heart pounding, and there it was. No deposit of $12,000. No series of smaller deposits that could add up to that amount. No withdrawals indicating loan payments. Nothing. The record showed exactly what her father's ledgers had shown. A man managing his finances carefully, living within his means, selling assets when necessary, but never borrowing money. It's not here, she breathed. Jack, the debt doesn't exist. This proves it. Jack read over her shoulder, then carefully folded the papers and tucked them inside his coat. This is good, Eleanor. Real good. But we need to get these to someone official before Blackwell finds out we have them. They left the telegraph office and headed for the sheriff's office 2 blocks away. Deputy Marshal Frank Collins was a young man, maybe 30, with an earnest face and a reputation for honesty, but also for being easily intimidated. He listened to their story with growing concern, examining the bank records with careful attention. This is certainly compelling evidence, he said finally. But Mrs. Rowan, I have to be honest with you. Silas Blackwell is a powerful man in this territory. He's got connections in Cheyenne, friends in the territorial government. If you're asking me to arrest him based on these documents, I'm asking you to investigate, Eleanor interrupted, to compare his forged debt agreement with my father's real signature, to question his witnesses, if they even exist. To do your job, Deputy Collins. The deputy flushed. I understand your frustration, ma'am, but I can't just... Can't or won't? Jack's voice was cold. Because it sounds to me like you're more worried about protecting a criminal than serving justice. Now see here. No, you see here. Jack leaned forward, his hands flat on the deputy's desk. That woman's father died protecting that ranch, and now a rich man is trying to steal it out from under her using fraud and intimidation. If you're too scared to stand up to him, fine, but don't pretend it's because you're following procedure. Colin's face went through several shades of red. I'm not scared. Then prove it. Take these documents, open an official investigation, and when Marshal Everett gets back from Laramie, brief him on everything. Let him decide how to proceed. The deputy looked between Jack and Eleanor, clearly torn between duty and self-preservation. Finally, he sighed. All right. I'll open a file, document your complaint, and hold these records as evidence. When the marshal returns, I'll make sure it's the first thing he reviews. He pulled out a form and began writing. But Mrs. Rowan, Mr. Rowan, you need to understand that this could take time. Investigations don't happen overnight. How much time? Eleanor asked. Weeks. Maybe months. We don't have months, Jack said flatly. Blackwell's already got his men watching us, threatening us. How long before threats turn into action? I can't speculate on... Then give us protection. Deputize some men to watch the ranch. Collins shook his head. I don't have the authority or the manpower for that. The marshal might, when he returns, but until then, we're on our own. Jack straightened up, his expression disgusted. Come on, Eleanor, we're wasting our time here. They left the sheriff's office with Eleanor feeling more frustrated than ever. They had evidence, they had proof. But without someone willing to act on it, the bank records were just paper. What now? She asked as they mounted their horses. Now we go see Judge Potter. If Collins won't help, maybe the judge knows someone who will. They rode to the judge's house and found him in his study, poring over law books. Sarah Potter served them tea while Eleanor explained everything. The bank records, the deputy's reluctance, their desperate need for someone to take action before Blackwell did. Judge Potter listened gravely, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Eleanor finished, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. This is a difficult situation, he said finally. You're right that the evidence is compelling, but you're also right that Blackwell has significant influence. Taking him on requires someone with the authority and the courage to withstand the pressure he'll bring to bear. Do you know anyone like that? Jack asked. The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and went to his bookshelf, pulling down a small wooden box. Inside were letters, neatly organized. There's a territorial judge in Cheyenne, Potter said, named Marcus Whitmore. We served together as circuit judges 15 years ago. He's tough, fair, and most importantly, he can't be bought. If anyone can help you, it's him. Will he listen to us? Eleanor asked. He'll listen to me. Potter selected a piece of stationery and began writing. I'll send him a letter tonight, explaining the situation and vouching for your character. It'll take about a week for my letter to reach him and for him to respond. But if he agrees to review your case, he has the authority to issue warrants, conduct investigations, and prosecute crimes across the entire territory. Eleanor felt hope flicker in her chest. Thank you, Judge Potter. Don't thank me yet. A week is a long time when you've got a man like Blackwell as an enemy. He handed the sealed letter to Jack. Take this to the post office. Send it express. And in the meantime, he paused. Watch your backs, both of you. They left the judge's house as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, and Eleanor noticed something that made her blood run cold. Across the street, partially hidden in the shadow of the livery stable, stood Thompson and one of his companions. Watching. Waiting. They followed us, she whispered to Jack. I know. They've been there since we left the sheriff's office. Jack's voice was calm, but his hand rested on his gun. Don't look at them directly. Just get on your horse and ride natural. Let them think we don't know they're there. They mounted up and began the ride home. Eleanor resisted the urge to look back to see if they were being followed, but she could feel eyes on her back like a physical weight. Jack, she said quietly as they left town behind, what happens when they report to Blackwell that we went to the judge, that we're trying to bring in outside help? Then Blackwell accelerates his timeline. Jack scanned the hills around them, looking for signs of ambush. He'll make his move sooner rather than later. We need to be ready. Ready for what? Eleanor sat down on the porch steps, wrapping her shawl tighter against the chill. Tell me something true, Jack. Something about you that has nothing to do with all this. He glanced at her, surprised. Why? Because I'm tired of being scared. And because if something happens tomorrow, if things go bad, I want to know the man I married, even if it was only supposed to be on paper. Jack was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice soft in the darkness. I had a sister once, Rebecca. She was 8 years younger than me, followed me everywhere like a shadow. When I rode off to war, when I was stupid enough to join Quantrill, she cried for 3 days straight, begged me not to go. He paused, his hands tightening around the rifle. I promised her I'd come back, promised I'd stay safe and stay good. And then I broke that promise in every way possible. What happened to her? Typhoid, 1866, she was 13. I got the letter 2 months after she died. Hadn't seen her in 4 years. His voice cracked slightly. I told myself it was better that way, that she didn't have to know what I'd become. But the truth is, I was just a coward. too ashamed to face her. Eleanor's heart ached for him.
You were a boy when you went to war. You didn't know. I knew enough. I knew right from wrong. I just chose wrong because it was easier, because everyone around me was choosing it too. He finally looked at her. That's why I came back when I heard about Blackwell, because I'm done choosing easy. I'm done being the person Rebecca would have been ashamed of. I think, Eleanor said softly, she would have been proud of who you're becoming. Maybe. I hope so. He smiled, sad and small. What about you? Tell me something true about Eleanor Price. Eleanor Rowan, she corrected gently, and saw surprise flicker across his face. Something true. She thought for a moment. I used to want to leave this place. When I was younger, before my mother died, I dreamed of going east, seeing cities, museums, the ocean. I thought the ranch was boring, that it was holding me back from some great adventure. She laughed softly. And now it's the only thing in the world that matters to me. Funny how that works. It's not funny. It's love. You just didn't recognize it until someone tried to take it away. They sat together in companionable silence, drinking coffee and watching the stars wheel overhead. And when dawn finally came, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Eleanor realized that whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. She had a partner now, a husband. Not in the way she'd imagined marriage would be, but in a way that was perhaps more valuable. Born of necessity, forged in crisis, and strengthened by shared purpose. The sun rose over the mountains, and with it came the sound of horses. Not Blackwell this time, someone else. Jack stood quickly, rifle raised, and Eleanor scrambled to her feet beside him as 3 riders appeared on the road, and at their head, wearing a marshal's star and a grim expression, rode Marshal Boone Everett himself. Marshal Boone Everett was a man carved from granite and hard experience, 60 if he was a day, with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen every kind of human wickedness the frontier could produce. He sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle, and when he dismounted in Eleanor's yard, his boots hit the ground with the weight of authority. Jack didn't lower his rifle. Marshal, didn't expect to see you back from Laramie for another few days. Got word there was trouble brewing out here. Decided to cut my trip short. Everett's gaze moved between Jack and Eleanor, assessing, calculating. Mind if I come up? Got some questions that need answering. Eleanor stepped forward before Jack could respond. Of course, Marshal. We've been hoping to speak with you. Have you now? Everett climbed the porch steps and his 2 deputies remained mounted, watching the horizon with the vigilance of men who expected trouble. That's interesting, seeing as how Deputy Collins filed a report yesterday claiming you 2 are engaged in marriage fraud to avoid legitimate debts. Eleanor's stomach dropped. That's not... Collins said he'd open an investigation into Blackwell's forgery, not accuse us of... Collins says a lot of things. Everett's voice was dry as desert dust. Most of them are what Silas Blackwell pays him to say, which is why I'm here instead of him. He gestured to the door. Can we talk inside? I've been riding since midnight and could use some coffee. They settled in the parlor, and Eleanor made fresh coffee with shaking hands while Jack and the marshal engaged in the careful dance of 2 armed men sizing each other up. Everett's deputies stayed outside, keeping watch, which Eleanor found both reassuring and terrifying. So, Everett said once he had a cup in his hands, why don't you tell me your version of events? Start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out. Eleanor and Jack took turns recounting everything. William Price's death, Blackwell's appearance with the forged debt, the forced marriage proposal, their midnight wedding, the confrontation on the porch. Jack explained about the grazing lease being twisted into a loan, and Eleanor showed the marshal the bank records proving no such debt existed. Everett listened without interruption, his weathered face revealing nothing. When they finished, he set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. That's quite a story, he said finally. It's the truth, Eleanor insisted. I believe you. Everett's words hung in the air like a gift. I've known Silas Blackwell for 20 years, known what he is, what he does. He's got half the territorial government in his pocket and the other half too scared to cross him. But here's the problem. Knowing he's a snake and proving it in a court of law are 2 very different things. We have proof. Jack pulled out the bank records.
These show William Price never borrowed any money, and Blackwell's got a signed document saying he did. Without the original to compare signatures, without witnesses to testify one way or the other, it comes down to his word against a dead man's reputation. Everett's expression was grim. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's how the system works when you're fighting someone with Blackwell's resources. So what are you saying? Eleanor's voice rose with frustration. That we should just give up? Let him steal my father's ranch? I'm saying you need more than bank records. You need witnesses. You need someone who will testify that Blackwell forged that signature, or that he's done this before to other people, or that he's engaged in a pattern of fraud that can't be dismissed as a simple business dispute. We've been trying to find other victims, Jack said, but everyone's too scared to talk. They've got reason to be. Everett stood and walked to the window, looking out at the valley. 3 years ago, a rancher named Tom Hutchins tried to fight Blackwell in court, claimed Blackwell had stolen water rights through falsified contracts. Hutchins had evidence, had witnesses lined up, everything. The night before the trial, his barn burned down with his prize horses inside. Message received. He dropped the suit and left the territory. Eleanor felt ice spreading through her veins. Are you saying Blackwell's going to burn us out? I'm saying he'll do whatever it takes to win. And right now he thinks you're vulnerable. Young widow, new husband who's barely more than a stranger, no family to back you up. He's probably planning his next move as we speak. Then help us. Eleanor moved to stand beside the marshal. You've got the authority, the badge. Make him answer for what he's done. Everett turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something like respect in his eyes. I can open an official investigation. I can request that a territorial judge review the case. But Mrs. Rowan, you need to understand, this is going to get worse before it gets better. When Blackwell realizes I'm involved, when he figures out you're not going to fold, he's going to escalate, and I can't be here every day to protect you. We don't need protection, Jack said quietly. We need justice. Sometimes you need both. Everett moved back to the table and pulled out a notebook. All right, I'm going to take your formal statements, document everything you've told me, and wire the territorial prosecutor in Cheyenne. I'll also pay a visit to Blackwell. Let him know he's under investigation. That might slow him down. Or it might make him desperate, Jack observed. That too. Everett began writing. Which is why I'm leaving Deputy Warren here with you for the next few days. He'll keep watch, make sure nothing happens while I'm gathering evidence. Eleanor glanced through the window at the younger of the two deputies, a man who looked barely old enough to shave. No offense, Marshal, but one deputy against however many men Blackwell can hire, Warren's a dead shot and meaner than he looks. But you're right, it's not much. That's why I need you both to be smart. Stay on the property. Don't go into town unless absolutely necessary. If Blackwell's men show up, don't engage. Send for me immediately. He looked at Jack. I know your reputation, Rowan. I know what you can do. But killing Blackwell's hired guns won't solve this. It'll just make you a murderer and him a victim. Jack's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Understood. They spent the next 2 hours going over every detail, with Everett taking meticulous notes and occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed just how sharp his mind was beneath that weathered exterior. By the time he finished, the sun was high overhead, and Eleanor was exhausted from reliving the trauma of the past week. One more thing, Everett said as he prepared to leave. This marriage of yours, is it genuine or just a legal maneuver? Eleanor and Jack exchanged glances. The question was more complicated than it seemed. It's legal, Jack said carefully. Witnessed, documented, filed with the territory. That's not what I asked. Everett's eyes were shrewd. Blackwell's lawyers are going to argue this is a sham marriage, entered into fraudulently to circumvent a legitimate debt. If a judge agrees, the marriage could be annulled and the debt reinstated. That's ridiculous, Eleanor protested. We're married. We live together. What more do they need? Consummation, for one thing. Everett's blunt words made Eleanor's face flame with embarrassment. Evidence that you're genuinely building a life together, not just playing house for legal purposes. I'm not trying to pry into your personal business, but you need to understand, everything about your relationship is going to be scrutinized. We understand, Jack said, his voice tight. After Everett and his second deputy rode off, Deputy Warren established himself on the porch, with a rifle and a tobacco pipe, looking every bit as young and untested as Eleanor had feared. Jack pulled her inside the house, his expression troubled. "He's right," Jack said without preamble, "about the marriage. If Blackwell can prove it's just a legal fiction, he can get it annulled." "But we are married," Eleanor said, though even to her own ears it sounded defensive. "We took vows. We signed documents. We've been sleeping in separate rooms. We barely know each other. Any decent lawyer could argue we're just two strangers sharing a house." Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I don't know how to fix that without making this something it's not supposed to be."
Eleanor understood what he wasn't saying. They'd agreed this was a marriage of convenience, a legal shield, and nothing more. But if they wanted that shield to hold, they needed to make it look real, feel real. "So we make it real," she said, the words coming out before she could second-guess them. Jack stared at her. "Eleanor, not like that." Her face was still hot, but she forced herself to continue. "But we stop pretending this is temporary. We stop acting like strangers. We become actual partners, not just legal ones." "What does that mean, practically speaking?" Eleanor thought about it. "It means you move your things into the main bedroom. It means we eat meals together, work the ranch together, present ourselves to the world as an actual married couple. It means—" She trailed off, uncertain how to articulate the rest. "It means we give this a real chance," Jack finished softly. "Not just for legal reasons, but because maybe it could actually become something genuine." The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibilities neither of them had allowed themselves to consider until this moment. Eleanor found herself studying Jack's face as if seeing him for the first time. The strong jaw, the honest eyes, the way his whole demeanor radiated quiet strength and determination. "I don't know if I can love you," she said, brutally honest. "I don't know if you can love me. But I think I could respect you, trust you, build something real with you, given time." "That's more than most marriages start with," Jack replied. "My parents barely knew each other on their wedding day. They built love out of partnership and shared purpose." He held out his hand. "So let's try it. For real this time." Eleanor took his hand, feeling the calluses and warmth of it, and shook once. "Partners. Partners." The rest of that day felt strange and momentous in ways Eleanor couldn't quite articulate. Jack moved his belongings into the main bedroom. Not many things, just a bedroll, some clothes, his weapons, and a small tin box containing what he called remembrances, but didn't elaborate on. Eleanor made space in the wardrobe and drawers, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that tonight, for the first time, they'd be sharing a room. Deputy Warren proved to be surprisingly good company despite his youth. Over lunch, he told them stories about Marshall Everett's legendary cases, tracking outlaws through blizzards, bringing down corrupt politicians, facing down lynch mobs with nothing but words and will. "The Marshall's the only truly honest lawman in Wyoming territory," Warren said with undisguised admiration, "which is why Blackwell hates him. Can't be bought, can't be scared, can't be stopped. If anyone can bring Blackwell down, it's him." "Let's hope you're right," Eleanor said. That afternoon, she and Jack worked together to repair a section of fence that had come loose. It was hard, physical labor, digging post holes, stretching wire, hammering stakes, and Eleanor found herself grateful for the distraction. Out here, with the sun on her back and honest work in her hands, it was easier to forget about forged documents and legal threats. Jack worked beside her with efficient grace, and Eleanor noticed how naturally they'd fallen into a rhythm, him holding posts steady while she hammered, her passing him tools before he asked for them, both of them moving in unconscious synchronization. "You're good at this," Jack observed as they stood back to admire their work. "Ranch work, I mean. Most women I've known would consider this beneath them. Most women you've known didn't grow up working alongside their fathers." Eleanor wiped sweat from her brow. "My mother died when I was 12. After that, it was just me and my father. He taught me everything: cattle, horses, fences, books. He never treated me like I was fragile just because I was a girl." "He raised you right." Jack's voice was warm with approval. "You're stronger than Blackwell ever gave you credit for. That's going to be his downfall." They returned to the house as the sun began its descent, tired and dusty but satisfied. Deputy Warren had made stew for dinner,
surprisingly good, with tender beef and vegetables from Eleanor's garden, and they ate together on the porch while the deputy regaled them with more stories. As twilight deepened into full dark, Warren retreated to the barn to sleep, insisting that Jack and Eleanor needed privacy. "I'll keep first watch," he said. "If I see anything suspicious, I'll fire a warning shot. Otherwise, try to get some rest. You both look like you need it." Alone in the house, Eleanor and Jack faced the inevitable awkwardness of the sleeping arrangements. Eleanor changed into her nightgown in the small washroom, while Jack prepared for bed in the main bedroom. And when she finally emerged, she found him already lying on the floor beside the bed, wrapped in blankets. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Giving you the bed. I've slept on worse floors." "Jack, that's ridiculous. The bed is big enough for both of us." "Eleanor, we're married. We're supposed to be convincing everyone this is real. How do we do that if you're sleeping on the floor like a kicked dog?" She climbed into bed and patted the other side. "Get up here, and don't argue." Jack hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and practicality. Finally, he stood and climbed into bed, staying so far on his side that he was practically falling off the edge. Eleanor blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness broken only by moonlight through the window. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. "Jack?" Eleanor's voice was small in the darkness. "Yeah? I'm scared. Of what comes next. Of what Blackwell might do." "I know. I am too." "You are?" She turned her head to look at him, barely able to make out his profile in the dim light. "You never seem scared." "That's because I've learned to hide it. But yeah, I'm scared. Scared I won't be fast enough, smart enough, strong enough to protect you. Scared that I made promises I can't keep." He was quiet for a moment. "Scared that your father trusted me and I'm going to let him down." Eleanor reached across the space between them and found his hand. "You're not going to let anyone down. We're going to win this, Jack. Together." His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. "Together," he agreed. They fell asleep like that, hands linked across the darkness, two people building something fragile and precious out of necessity and hope. Eleanor woke to gunfire. The crack of Warren's rifle split the night, followed immediately by answering shots and the thunder of hooves. Eleanor scrambled out of bed to find Jack already at the window, his revolver in hand, peering into the darkness. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice sharp with command. "Warren's engaged with someone at the tree line." More gunshots, flashes of muzzle fire illuminating the night in brief, terrible bursts. Eleanor grabbed her father's rifle from the corner and moved to the opposite window, trying to see what they were facing. "How many?" she called to Jack. "At least 4 riders, maybe more." Another volley of shots and something hit the side of the house with a solid thunk. "They're not trying to hit us. They're trying to scare us." "It's working." Eleanor's voice was steadier than she felt. The attack lasted maybe 5 minutes, but felt like hours. Warren held his ground in the barn, his rifle barking steadily, and the attackers seemed content to circle and shoot without actually pressing an assault. Then, as suddenly as it began, the shooting stopped. The riders wheeled away and disappeared into the night, leaving only dust and echoes behind. Jack was out the door before Eleanor could stop him, running toward the barn with his gun raised. She followed despite his shouted protests, her heart in her throat, terrified of what they'd find. Warren was alive, crouched behind a water trough with his rifle smoking in his hands. Blood ran down his left arm, where a bullet had grazed him, but he was grinning like a madman. "Got one of them," he said, pointing to where a dark shape lay motionless 30 yards away. "Rest of them ran when they realized I wasn't going to fold." Jack moved cautiously toward the fallen figure, while Eleanor helped Warren bind his wound. When Jack returned, his face was grim. "Dead," he reported. "Shot through the chest. It's one of Blackwell's men. I recognize him from town." "Good," Warren said without remorse. "Maybe the others will think twice before coming back. Or maybe they'll come back with more men." Jack scanned the darkness. "We need to move the body, document what happened, and send word to Marshal Everett immediately. This just became attempted murder." They spent the rest of the night on high alert, taking turns keeping watch while Eleanor wrote out a detailed account of the attack. At first light, Warren rode to town to fetch the marshal,
leaving Jack and Eleanor alone with a corpse and a growing sense that the situation was spiraling beyond their control. "This is my fault," Eleanor said as they waited in the cold dawn. "If I'd just accepted Blackwell's offer, if I'd married him, then you'd be trapped in a hell of his making, and he'd be free to do this to someone else." Jack's voice was firm. "You didn't start this, Eleanor. Blackwell did.
And he's the one who's going to pay for it." Marshal Everett arrived by mid-morning with 6 deputies, his face like a thundercloud. He examined the body, took statements, and documented everything with the thoroughness of a man building a legal case brick by brick. "This changes everything," he said when he finished. "Attempted murder, assault with deadly weapons. These are territorial crimes. I can arrest Blackwell right now on suspicion of ordering this attack." "Will it stick?" Jack asked. "Not unless the survivors talk, and they won't. Blackwell's too smart to have given direct orders. He'll have used intermediaries, cutouts, layers of deniability." Everett's frustration was evident. "But it gives me leverage. I can bring him in, question him, make his life difficult, maybe shake something loose." "Or make him more desperate," Eleanor pointed out. "That too." Everett called over 2 of his deputies. "I want round-the-clock protection on this property. 2-man teams, rotating shifts. Nobody gets close without being challenged. And someone ride to Cheyenne. I want Judge Whitmore here within the week if possible. This case needs to move forward fast before more people die." The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Eleanor and Jack maintained the ranch under the watchful eyes of Everett's deputies. While in town, the marshal arrested 3 of Blackwell's known associates on various charges. None of them talked, but the pressure was building. On the 4th day, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch, a young man in his 20s, dusty from hard riding, with the nervous energy of someone about to do something dangerous. "My name's Peter Hutchins," he said, standing on the porch with his hat in his hands. "Tom Hutchins was my uncle. I heard what you're doing standing up to Blackwell, and I wanted to tell you, I'll testify, about what he did to my uncle, about the forged contracts and the barn fire and everything." Eleanor felt hope surge in her chest. "You're willing to testify in court?" "If it means bringing that bastard down, yes." Peter's young face was set with determination. "My uncle died 6 months ago. Heart gave out from the stress and the loss. Blackwell killed him as surely as if he'd put a gun to his head. I want justice for him." Jack stepped forward. "You understand what you're risking. Blackwell will come after you." "Let him try." Peter's hand moved to the gun at his hip. "I'm not my uncle. I won't run." Everett, when informed of this development, moved quickly. He brought Peter to Cheyenne himself to give a deposition to the territorial prosecutor, and word came back that the prosecutor was now very interested in expanding the investigation beyond just Eleanor's case. Blackwell, it seemed, had left a trail of victims across Wyoming, and Peter's testimony had given others courage to come forward. Within a week, 3 more people had contacted the marshal with their own stories of fraud, intimidation, and theft at Blackwell's hands. The case was growing, metastasizing, becoming something larger than a simple dispute over a debt. Eleanor and Jack continued their routine, growing more comfortable with each other by necessity and proximity. They worked the ranch together during the day, planned strategy with Everett in the evenings, and at night they'd lie in bed and talk, really talk, about their lives, their fears, their hopes for a future that was no longer just a legal fiction. "If we win this," Eleanor said one night, "if we actually beat Blackwell and keep the ranch, what then?" Jack was quiet for a moment. "Then we decide if this marriage becomes real or if we go our separate ways like we originally planned." "And which do you want?" "I want whatever you want, Eleanor. I came here to help you, not to trap you." She rolled over to face him in the darkness. "That's not an answer." "Fine." His voice was rough with emotion. "I want this to be real. I want to wake up every morning next to you, work this land together, build something that lasts. But only if that's what you want too. I won't force you into something just because we're legally bound." Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. "I think," she said carefully, "that I could want that too. Given time, given the chance to really know you, not just survive alongside you. Then we'll take that time, after this is over, when we're not fighting for our lives every damn day." Promise? Promise. 2 weeks after the night attack, Judge Marcus Whitmore arrived in Silver Creek with an entourage of territorial officials, legal clerks, and enough authority to make even Silas Blackwell sweat. He was a tall man with iron gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime handing down judgments, and he wasted no time. Within hours of his arrival, he'd issued a summons for Blackwell to appear before him, subpoenaed all relevant documents from both parties, and announced that he'd be conducting a preliminary hearing to determine if sufficient evidence existed to pursue criminal charges. The hearing was set for 3 days hence, to be held in the Silver Creek Courthouse. Eleanor barely slept in the intervening time, going over her testimony with Everett, organizing documents, preparing for what felt like the fight of her life. On the morning of the hearing, she dressed in her mother's best dress again, armor made of fabric and memory, and let Jack help her into the wagon. He drove them to town with Marshal Everett and 4 deputies flanking them like an honor guard, and Eleanor noticed how people stopped to watch them pass, how word had spread until it seemed like the entire territory was watching to see what would happen. The courthouse was packed, every seat filled, people standing in the back craning their necks to see. And there, on the opposite side of the aisle, sat Silas Blackwell with 3 expensive lawyers from Cheyenne, looking supremely confident despite everything. Judge Whitmore called the proceedings to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel, and Eleanor's future hung in the balance as the testimony began. Marshal Everett went first, laying out the timeline of events with cold precision. Then came the bank records, entered into evidence and examined by both sides. Then Peter Hutchins took the stand, his voice shaking but steady as he recounted his uncle's destruction at Blackwell's hands. Blackwell's lawyers objected repeatedly, calling the testimony hearsay, irrelevant, prejudicial. But Judge Whitmore overruled them each time, his expression growing darker as the pattern of fraud emerged. Then it was Eleanor's turn. She walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like water, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Marsh, led Eleanor through her testimony with practiced skill. Eleanor recounted her father's death, Blackwell's appearance with the forged debt, the forced marriage proposal, the midnight wedding to Jack. She showed the court her father's ledgers, pointed out the grazing lease that Blackwell had twisted into something sinister. "And what would you have lost, Mrs. Rowan?" Marsh asked, "if you had not married Jack Rowan that night?" "Everything." Eleanor's voice rang clear through the courtroom. "My home, my father's legacy, my future. Blackwell would have taken it all and called it legal." Blackwell's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Caldwell, rose for cross-examination with the predatory smile of someone about to go in for the kill. "Mrs.
Rowan," he began smoothly, "isn't it true that you barely knew Jack Rowan before marrying him?" "We'd met years before. Yes or no, please, did you know him well?" "No, but—" "And isn't it true that this marriage was arranged specifically to circumvent my client's legitimate claim?" "There was no legitimate claim. The debt was forged." "That's for this court to decide." Caldwell paced in front of the witness stand. "Isn't it convenient that you managed to marry someone just hours before your deadline? That you found a man willing to bind himself to a virtual stranger? Jack Rowan is a good man who saw an injustice. Jack Rowan is a known gunfighter with a violent past." Caldwell turned to face the courtroom. "He rode with Quantrill's raiders during the war, participated in multiple massacres, and has killed at least 12 men by his own admission. And you expect this court to believe he married you out of the goodness of his heart?" Eleanor's face burned with anger.
"What Jack did during the war has nothing to do with— It has everything to do with your credibility, Mrs. Rowan. You've married a killer to avoid your father's debts, and now you want this court to punish my client for attempting to collect what he's legally owed." "Objection!" Marsh was on her feet. "Counsel is testifying rather than questioning." "Sustained." Judge Whitmore's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Caldwell, ask questions or sit down." But the damage was done. Eleanor could see it in the faces of the courtroom spectators. Doubt, suspicion, the wondering if maybe Blackwell's version of events held some truth. Caldwell continued his assault, picking apart every detail of Eleanor's story, trying to make her seem like a scheming woman who'd manipulated a violent man into helping her commit fraud. By the time he finished, Eleanor felt wrung out, exhausted, close to tears. Then Jack took the stand, and everything changed. He sat calmly in the witness chair, his hands relaxed, his voice steady as he answered Marcia's questions about how he'd learned of Eleanor's situation, why he'd decided to help, what he'd discovered about Blackwell's fraud. When Caldwell rose for cross-examination, you could feel the tension in the room ratchet up another notch. These were two dangerous men sizing each other up, and everyone knew it. "Mr. Rowan," Caldwell began, "you're a killer, are you not?" "I've killed men," Jack replied evenly, "during the war, in self-defense, and to protect others. I'm not proud of it, but I won't deny it either." "And you expect this court to believe you married Mrs. Mrs. Rowan, out of altruism? That you had no ulterior motives?" "I married her to protect her from a predator." Jack's eyes locked on Blackwell across the courtroom. "From a man who uses legal documents as weapons and threatens women to get what he wants." "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth. And if you think I'm lying, put Blackwell on the stand under oath. Let him explain where those $12,000 went if William Price actually borrowed them. Let him produce the witnesses who supposedly signed that debt agreement. Let him explain why he needs to steal land from widows when he already owns half the territory." Caldwell's smile slipped. "My client is not on trial here." "Maybe he should be." Jack leaned forward, and his voice dropped to something cold and deadly. "Because here's what I know, Mr. Caldwell. Your client sent men to kill us 12 nights ago. One of them died trying, the others ran, and Blackwell's sitting over there pretending he had nothing to do with it, hiding behind lawyers and legal technicalities while real people suffer. So yeah, I'm a killer, but at least I'm an honest one." The courtroom erupted. Judge Whitmore hammered his gavel, calling for order, while Blackwell's lawyers shouted objections and Marshal Everett stood to keep the peace. In the chaos, Eleanor caught Jack's eye across the room, and he gave her the smallest nod. He'd done what he set out to do, put Blackwell on the defensive, made it about character rather than just documents, reminded everyone watching exactly what kind of man they were dealing with. When order was finally restored, Judge Whitmore called a recess. "We'll reconvene in 1 hour," he announced. "I need time to review the evidence and consider the testimony." That hour felt like an eternity. Eleanor and Jack waited in an anteroom with Marshal Everett, none of them speaking, all of them knowing that their entire future hung on what Whitmore decided. When they were finally called back, the courtroom was silent as a tomb. Judge Whitmore looked at both parties, his expression unreadable, and began to speak. "I've reviewed the evidence presented today along with the depositions and supporting documents provided by both parties. This is a complex case involving serious allegations of fraud, forgery, and criminal intimidation." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "However, certain facts are undisputed. William Price maintained meticulous financial records that show no evidence of borrowing $12,000. The bank records from Cheyenne Trust and Loan support this. Mr. Blackwell's debt agreement lacks proper witnesses and contains several irregularities that raise questions about its authenticity." Eleanor's heart began to pound with hope. "Furthermore," Whitmore continued, "the testimony of Peter Hutchins and others establishes a pattern of behavior suggesting that Mr. Blackwell has, on multiple occasions, used questionable legal documents to acquire property from vulnerable individuals." Blackwell's face had gone red, his lawyers whispering urgently in his ears. "Therefore, I am ruling that there is sufficient evidence to proceed with a full criminal investigation into Mr. Silas Blackwell's business practices, specifically relating to allegations of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. I am also issuing a temporary injunction preventing Mr. Blackwell from taking any action related to the Price, now Rowan, property until such time as the alleged debt can be properly investigated and verified." "Your Honor," Caldwell began, but Whitmore cut him off. "I'm not finished. With regards to the marriage between Eleanor Price and Jack Rowan, I find no evidence that it was entered into fraudulently. Whether it was motivated by love or legal necessity is irrelevant. The marriage is valid under territorial law, and I will not entertain arguments for annulment." Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. They'd won. Not the whole war, maybe, but this crucial battle. "This court is adjourned." Whitmore's gavel came down with finality. "Marshal Everett, I'm ordering you to expand your investigation, and Mr. Blackwell, He fixed the cattle baron with a steely gaze. I suggest you cooperate fully, because if even half of what I've heard today is true, you're going to be spending a long time answering for it. The courtroom erupted again, this time with cheers and applause from the spectators who'd been watching a rich man finally face consequences. Eleanor found herself pulled into Jack's arms, both of them holding on tight, while around them, justice, imperfect and incomplete, but justice nonetheless, finally began to assert itself. But victory, Eleanor learned in the days that followed, was a double-edged sword that cut both ways. Judge Whitmore's ruling had protected the ranch and validated their marriage, but it had also backed Silas Blackwell into a corner, and cornered animals were the most dangerous kind. They left the courthouse that afternoon surrounded by well-wishers and curious onlookers, people who wanted to shake Jack's hand or offer Eleanor their congratulations. Peter Hutchins caught up with them on the courthouse steps, his young face bright with vindication. "You did it," he said, gripping Eleanor's hand. "You actually stood up to him and won." "We're not done yet," Marshal Everett cautioned, appearing beside them with his ever-present vigilance. Whitmore ordered an investigation, not an arrest. Blackwell's still free, still dangerous, and now he's humiliated. That makes him unpredictable. As if summoning the devil by speaking his name, Blackwell himself emerged from the courthouse, surrounded by his lawyers. He'd aged a decade in the past hour, his face haggard and his eyes burning with a rage that made Eleanor's blood run cold. When his gaze found hers across the crowd, he stopped walking entirely. For a long moment, they stared at each other, victor and vanquished, though Eleanor knew better than to think the war was over. Then Blackwell's lips moved, forming words only she could see. "This isn't finished." Jack stepped between them, blocking Blackwell's view of Eleanor, his hand resting casually near his gun. The message was clear. Try something and find out what happens. Blackwell's lawyers pulled him away, hustling him toward a waiting carriage, but the threat lingered in the air like smoke after gunfire. Marshal Everett insisted on escorting Eleanor and Jack back to the ranch personally, with 4 deputies riding alongside as insurance against ambush. "I want you both to stay alert," Everett said as they rode through the gathering dusk. "Blackwell's lost face today. Lost money, lost reputation, lost control. Men like him don't handle that well. He'll either fold completely or come at you with everything he's got." "Which do you think it'll be?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. "He's not the folding type." Everett's weathered face was grim. "I'm posting guards at your ranch indefinitely, and I want you to think seriously about leaving for a while, going to Cheyenne or Denver until the investigation concludes and Blackwell's either arrested or cleared." "No." Eleanor's voice was firm. "I won't be driven from my home. That's what he wants, for me to run, to abandon the ranch so he can claim it's been deserted. I'm staying." "Eleanor," Jack began, but she cut him off. "This is my father's land, Jack. My land now. Our land if this marriage is real. And I won't give it up without a fight." Jack looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition of the steel in her spine that matched his own. "Then we stay," he said simply, "and we fight." Everett sighed but didn't argue further. He knew that look, the set of her jaw that said no amount of logic or fear would change her mind. "All right. But you follow my rules. No unnecessary trips to town. No working the far sections of the property alone. And if anything seems off, you fire 3 shots in the air and my men will come running. Understood?" They both agreed, though Eleanor could see the worry etched in the marshal's face as he and his deputies set up a rotating watch around the property. 2 men would be on guard at all times, positioned to see all approaches to the house and barn. It should have made Eleanor feel safer. Instead, it just reinforced how real the danger had become. That night, lying in bed beside Jack in the darkness, Eleanor found herself unable to sleep. Every sound made her tense. The wind rattling the windows, the creak of settling wood, the distant call of an owl hunting in the darkness. "You're thinking too loud," Jack murmured beside her. "I can practically hear your mind racing." "How can you be so calm? Blackwell threatened us in front of the whole courthouse." "He didn't threaten us. He made eye contact and mouthed some words. That's not actionable. It's just intimidation." Jack rolled onto his side to face her. "And I'm not calm.
I'm terrified. But I learned a long time ago that fear is useful. It keeps you sharp, keeps you alive, as long as you don't let it paralyze you. Is that what they taught you during the war? Jack was quiet for a long moment. That's what I learned from watching good men die because they froze up when they should have moved. Fear's a tool, Eleanor. Use it, don't let it use you. She reached out in the darkness and found his hand. Tell me we're going to survive this. We're going to survive this. His fingers laced through hers. I promise you, Eleanor, whatever Blackwell throws at us, we'll survive it together. How can you be so sure? Because we have something he doesn't. Something he's never understood and never will. Jack's voice was soft but certain. We have something worth fighting for. He's just fighting to win. That's the difference between surviving and living. Eleanor held on to those words like a lifeline as she finally drifted into uneasy sleep. The next week passed in tense anticipation. Marshal Everett's investigation expanded, bringing in more victims of Blackwell's schemes, ranchers who'd lost land, businessmen who'd been muscled out of deals, families who'd been systematically destroyed through legal manipulation and violence. The case against Blackwell grew stronger by the day, and word came from Cheyenne that the territorial prosecutor was preparing formal charges of fraud, forgery, and racketeering. But Blackwell himself had gone to ground. He'd retreated to his massive ranch north of Silver Creek and hadn't been seen in town since the hearing. His hired guns had scattered, some leaving the territory entirely, others hunkering down and waiting to see which way the wind would blow. The silence felt ominous, like the stillness before a storm. Eleanor and Jack used the time to prepare. They reinforced the barn doors, moved their most valuable possessions into a root cellar that could serve as a refuge if needed, and practiced with their weapons until Eleanor could hit a target at 50 yards with her rifle. Jack taught her how to reload quickly, how to aim in low light, how to breathe through the adrenaline when danger came calling. I don't want to shoot anyone, Eleanor said after one particularly intensive practice session, her hands still trembling from the recoil. Neither do I. Jack checked her rifle, cleaning and oiling it with practiced ease. But wanting and doing are different things. If it comes down to your life or theirs, Eleanor, I need to know you'll do what's necessary. And if I can't, then I'll do it for you. But I'd rather you be able to protect yourself when I'm not there. He handed back the rifle. Your father taught you to shoot. I'm just teaching you to fight. They also used the time to work on making their marriage look and feel more real. They took meals together on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. They worked the ranch side by side, their teamwork growing smoother with each passing day. They attended church in Silver Creek with an escort of deputies, sitting together in the Price family pew while the congregation whispered and stared. And at night, they lay in bed and talked until sleep claimed them, slowly building something that felt increasingly solid and genuine. Eleanor found herself noticing small things about Jack, the way he hummed while he worked, the careful way he treated the horses, the fact that he read poetry when he thought no one was watching. And Jack, for his part, learned Eleanor's patterns, how she needed her coffee strong and black, how she bit her lower lip when concentrating, how she grieved her father in quiet moments when she thought herself alone. This is starting to feel real, Eleanor admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of amber and rose. Not just the legal part, all of it. Jack didn't respond immediately, his eyes on the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. It's been real for me since the night I came back, since I saw you standing there with that rifle, terrified but defiant, refusing to be crushed by a man twice your size with 10 times your resources. He turned to look at her. I told myself I was just helping William Price's daughter, but somewhere along the way, you stopped being just his daughter and became more. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. More? Eleanor Rowan, my wife, my partner. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly tender. My reason for staying, for fighting, for wanting to see tomorrow. Jack, her voice caught on his name. You don't have to say anything back. I'm not asking for promises or declarations. I just wanted you to know that when this is over, when Blackwell's in prison or dead or gone, I'm not leaving, not unless you tell me to.
Eleanor leaned forward and kissed him, really kissed him, for the first time since their wedding. It was brief, chaste, but full of promise and possibility. When she pulled back, Jack's eyes were wide with surprise. "I'm not telling you to leave," she whispered. "I'm asking you to stay." The moment stretched between them, heavy with meaning, and Eleanor wondered if this was how real marriages began, not with grand gestures and passionate declarations, but with quiet admissions and gentle touches and the slow building of something that could last. Then one of the deputies called out a warning, breaking the spell. A rider was approaching fast, pushing his horse hard up the road toward the ranch. Jack was on his feet instantly, hand on his gun, while Eleanor grabbed her rifle from beside the door. The rider resolved into Deputy Warren, his face pale and his horse lathered with sweat. He pulled up in front of the house, nearly falling from the saddle in his haste. "Marshal Everett sent me," Warren gasped, out of breath. "Blackwell's made his move. He's filed for bankruptcy, claiming he can't pay his debts. He's liquidating everything, selling off property, cattle, businesses, and he's heading for the border." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "He's running." "Looks that way. The marshal's organizing a posse to bring him in before he can cross into Montana or Canada. But that's not the worst of it." Warren's young face was tight with worry. Before he left, Blackwell met with some men at a saloon in Rawlins. Hard men, gunfighters from Colorado and Utah. Word is he hired them to finish what his regular crew couldn't. "Finish what?" Jack's voice was deadly quiet. "You. Both of you. Blackwell's not planning to outrun his legal troubles. He's planning to eliminate the witnesses against him. He figures if Eleanor's dead and you're dead, the whole case falls apart." The deputies stationed around the property converged on the house, weapons drawn, scanning the darkening landscape for threats. Eleanor felt ice spreading through her veins as the reality sank in. Blackwell had moved beyond intimidation and legal maneuvering. He'd decided that murder was his only option. "How long do we have?" Jack asked, already calculating, planning. "Marshall thinks they'll come tonight or tomorrow night at the latest. Blackwell paid them half up front, the rest on completion. These aren't his usual thugs, they're professional killers. Fast, ruthless, and they won't stop until the job's done or they're dead." "How many?" "At least 6, maybe more." Jack's face had gone hard as granite. "Then we need to be ready. Warren, ride back and tell Everett we're fortifying here. We're not running, we're not hiding. Let these killers come. We'll be waiting." "Jack," Eleanor began, fear clawing at her throat, but he turned to her with eyes that burned with fierce determination. "No more running, Eleanor. No more being victims. We end this tonight, one way or another." The next few hours were a blur of frantic preparation. The deputies helped Jack board up the windows on the ground floor, leaving only narrow shooting slots. They moved ammunition and weapons inside, along with food and water in case they ended up under siege. They set up defensive positions in the barn and around the property perimeter, creating overlapping fields of fire that would make any approach costly. Eleanor worked alongside the men, loading rifles and pistols, preparing bandages and medical supplies, doing everything she could to feel useful rather than helpless. But underneath the activity, terror churned in her gut. These weren't Blackwell's incompetent hired hands. These were professional killers, men who murdered for money and would show no mercy. As full darkness fell, Jack gathered everyone in the house for final instructions. There were 8 of them total: Jack and Eleanor, Warren, and 5 other deputies. Against at least 6 professional gunfighters, the odds weren't good. "They'll come between midnight and dawn," Jack said, his voice calm despite the circumstances. "That's when we're most likely to be asleep, when visibility's worst. They'll try to surround the house, probably set fire to the barn to draw us out. Our advantage is that we know the property and they don't. We've got good defensive positions and enough firepower to make them pay for every inch." "What about Eleanor?" Warren asked. "Should she go to the root cellar, stay hidden?" "No?" Eleanor stepped forward before Jack could answer. "I'm not hiding while you all fight for my home. I can shoot, I can reload, I can be useful. This is my fight, as much as anyone's." The deputies exchanged uncertain glances, but Jack nodded. "She's right. Eleanor stays with me in the main house. Warren, you take 2 men and hold the barn. That's our most vulnerable point. The rest of you spread out. 1 on the roof for high ground, 2 covering the east and west approaches." They took their positions as the clock crept toward midnight. Eleanor found herself stationed at the front window with Jack beside her, both of them watching the moonlit yard and the dark tree line beyond. The night was clear and cold, perfect for killing. "I'm scared," Eleanor admitted in a whisper. "Good. That means you're smart." Jack didn't take his eyes off the darkness. "Just remember what I taught you. Breathe, aim, squeeze. Don't think about who you're shooting at. Just protect yourself and protect this house. And if something happens to you, it won't." "But if it does?" Jack finally looked at her, and in the dim lamplight, his face was fierce with determination and something that looked a lot like love. "Then you keep fighting. You survive. You live the life your father wanted for you, on this land, with your head held high. Promise me, Eleanor." "I promise." Her voice broke on the words. "But you promise me something too. Promise you won't die tonight. Promise you'll see tomorrow with me." "I promise." He leaned over and kissed her forehead, a benediction and a vow. "We're going to survive this. Together." The word had become their talisman, their shared faith. Together. Midnight came and went. 1 o'clock. 2. The tension stretched tighter with each passing minute, everyone's nerves worn raw by waiting. Eleanor's hands cramped from gripping her rifle, and her eyes burned from staring into the darkness. At 3:30 in the morning, the attack came. It started with fire. Not the barn as Jack had predicted, but the small storage shed 50 yards from the house, suddenly erupting in flames that turned night into flickering orange day. Eleanor heard shouts from the deputies, the crack of rifle fire, and then bullets were slamming into the walls around them. "Here we go," Jack said, eerily calm, and began returning fire with methodical precision. Eleanor forced herself to breathe, to aim, to squeeze the trigger like he'd taught her. A shadow moved near the burning shed, and she fired, saw the shadow jerk and fall. Her stomach lurched with nausea, but there was no time to think about what she'd just done because more shapes were moving in the darkness, circling the house like wolves. The gunfight that followed was chaos and terror compressed into endless minutes that felt like hours. Muzzle flashes lit the night like lightning, the roar of gunfire was deafening, and the acrid smell of black powder filled the air until Eleanor could barely breathe. Jack fired and reloaded with inhuman speed, shouting instructions to the deputies, coordinating their defense even as bullets punched through the walls around them. Eleanor shot at anything that moved, trying not to think about the bodies piling up in the yard, trying not to hear the screams of wounded men. Warren and his team held the barn, their rifles barking steadily, and the deputy on the roof picked off attackers trying to flank them from the tree line. But the attackers were good, better than good. They moved with military precision, using fire and suppressing shots to advance, always probing for weaknesses. One managed to reach the house and tried to break down the back door, only to be driven back by point-blank fire from Jack. Another threw something that landed on the porch with a heavy thud. "Dynamite!" Jack shouted, and grabbed Eleanor, throwing them both to the floor just as the explosion tore apart the front porch. Wood splinters filled the air like shrapnel, and Eleanor's ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. Jack was pulling her to her feet, his mouth moving, but she couldn't hear the words. Then her hearing started to return in pieces. Gunfire, shouts, the crackle of flames now eating at what remained of the porch. The front of the house was exposed, the defensive position compromised. "We need to fall back," Jack was yelling to the others. "Everyone to the barn, now!" They ran through the chaos, bullets kicking up dirt around their feet. Eleanor saw one of the deputies go down, clutching his leg, and she and Jack grabbed him, dragging him toward the barn while Warren laid down covering fire. They made it inside just as another volley of shots shredded the air where they'd been standing. Warren slammed the barn doors shut, and they barricaded them with whatever they could find, hay bales, equipment, anything heavy. The barn was built of solid timber, harder to breach than the house, but they were also trapped now. If the attackers set fire to the barn, they'd have to choose between burning alive or running into a hail of bullets. "How many left?" Eleanor gasped, checking the wounded deputy's leg. The bullet had gone clean through, missing the bone, painful but survivable if they could stop the bleeding. "At least 3 attackers still active," Warren reported. "Maybe 4. We got 3 confirmed kills and wounded a couple others, but we lost Simpson on the roof, and Davidson took a bullet to the shoulder." They'd been fighting for maybe 15 minutes, and already half their force was casualties. Eleanor's hand shook as she bound the wounded deputy's leg, using strips torn from her skirt. Around her, the remaining men reloaded weapons and took positions at the barn's small windows. "They're regrouping," Jack observed, peering through a crack in the wall. "Smart move. They've got us pinned. They can afford to take their time now." "Or they're waiting for reinforcements," Warren suggested grimly. But no reinforcements came for the attackers. Instead, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the dawn, lots of horses, coming fast. Eleanor's heart leaped with hope that turned to terror as she realized it could be more of Blackwell's men. Then a familiar voice boomed across the yard. "This is Marshal Boone Everett. Drop your weapons and surrender. You're surrounded." The marshal had come with what looked like half the able-bodied men in Silver Creek, townspeople who'd armed themselves and ridden out to help, probably alerted by the gunfire echoing across the valley. Eleanor saw Peter Hutchins among them, and old Judge Potter despite his age, and a dozen others who'd decided that enough was enough. The remaining attackers tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Hemmed in on all sides, they threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Within minutes, it was over. The killers were captured, the wounded were being tended to, and Marshal Everett was striding through the carnage with his face like thunder. "Is everyone all right?" he called out as Jack opened the barn doors. "2 wounded, 1 dead," Jack reported. "Eleanor and I are fine." Everett's eyes swept over Eleanor, taking in her torn and bloodied dress, her soot-stained face, the rifle still clutched in her hands. "Mrs. Rowan, you look like you've been through hell." "We all have." Eleanor's voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and hollow. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving her shaky and nauseous. "But we're alive." "Thanks to your husband." Everett clapped Jack on the shoulder. "Word in town is you orchestrated this defense like a general. Saved a lot of lives tonight." "We saved each other," Jack corrected, pulling Eleanor close. "That's what partners do." As dawn broke fully over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscenely beautiful after the night's violence, Eleanor surveyed the damage to her home. The house was riddled with bullet holes, the front porch was gone, the storage shed was a smoking ruin. 3 men lay dead in her yard, professional killers who'd come to murder her and had paid the ultimate price. She should have felt victorious, should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt numb, empty, wrung out like a dish rag. Marshal Everett approached with a grim expression. "We caught one of the attackers alive and coherent enough to talk. He confirmed everything. Blackwell hired them to kill you both, paid half up front. The man signed a full confession in exchange for leniency. That's more than enough to charge Blackwell with conspiracy to commit murder." "Where is he?" Jack asked. "Blackwell." "That's the interesting part. When my men went to arrest him at his ranch, he was already dead. Shot himself in his study sometime last night." Everett pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Left a note. Confession of sorts, admitting to forgery, fraud, and hiring the killers. Fraud and hiring the... Says he couldn't live with the shame of losing everything." Eleanor took the note with trembling fingers and read Blackwell's final words. A rambling, bitter screed about how the world had turned against him, how ungrateful people were, how he'd been driven to desperate measures by desperate circumstances. Even in death, he couldn't accept responsibility for his own actions. "So it's over," she said quietly. "Really over." "It's over," Everett confirmed. "The land is legally yours, clear title. Blackwell's assets are being liquidated to pay his legitimate debts, and his criminal empire is finished. You're free, Mrs. Rowan." Free. The word should have filled her with joy. Instead, Eleanor felt only exhaustion and a bone-deep sadness for all the lives destroyed by one man's greed. She handed the note back to Everett and turned to look at her damaged home, at Jack standing beside her with his own exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "What do we do now?" she asked. Jack's arm came around her shoulders, solid and warm and real. "Now we rebuild. We fix the house, we work the ranch, we live the life we fought for." He tilted her chin up so she was looking into his eyes. "We keep our promises to each other, together." "Together," Eleanor echoed, and despite everything, the violence, the death, the destruction, She felt hope kindle in her chest like a small, stubborn flame. The townspeople stayed to help throughout that day and the next, repairing what could be fixed and clearing away what couldn't be saved. Judge Potter organized work crews while his wife Sarah tended to the wounded. Peter Hutchins worked alongside Jack to rebuild the porch, and Eleanor found herself surrounded by neighbors and strangers who'd become friends through shared adversity. On the third day after the attack, as the sun set over the valley in a blaze of orange and purple glory, Eleanor and Jack stood on their newly rebuilt porch and surveyed their domain. The ranch bore scars from the battle, but it was still standing, still theirs. "My father would have been proud," Eleanor said softly. "Not of the violence, but of the fact that we didn't give up, that we fought for what was right." "He was proud of you long before any of this happened," Jack replied. "I could see it in the way he talked about you, the way he built this place with you in mind. He knew you were strong enough to hold on to it. I couldn't have done it alone. You shouldn't have had to." Jack turned to face her fully. "Eleanor, I know we got married for practical reasons, to protect the ranch, to stop Blackwell. But somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a legal arrangement for me. It became real. You became everything." Eleanor's heart swelled with an emotion she'd been too scared and too busy to examine until now. It wasn't the wild, passionate love of romantic novels. It was something deeper, steadier, built on trust and respect and shared purpose, the kind of love that lasted. "It became real for me too," she admitted. "I don't know exactly when. Maybe it was watching you stand up to Blackwell, or teaching me to shoot, or lying beside me in the dark telling me we'd survive. But somewhere in all of that, you stopped being the stranger who married me and became the man I can't imagine living without." Jack cupped her face in his hands, his calloused palms gentle against her skin. "Then let's do this right. Let's start over, without the fear and the pressure and the violence. Let's court each other proper, take our time, build something that's ours and nobody else's." "We're already married," Eleanor pointed out with a small smile. "Then we'll have the wedding we deserve. Big ceremony, whole town invited, your father's memory honored. We'll make vows that aren't about legal protection, but about choosing each other, every day, for the rest of our lives." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. "Jack Rowan, are you proposing to your own wife?" "Reckon I am." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a ring. Not gold this time, but silver with a pearl that gleamed like captured moonlight. "This was my mother's. Only thing I have left from before the war. I've been carrying it with me for 3 years, waiting until I became someone worthy of giving it to the right woman." He took Eleanor's hand. "You're that woman, Eleanor. Not because you needed saving, but because you're strong enough to stand on your own and still choose to stand with me. Will you marry me? Again? For real this time?" Eleanor's answer came not in words, but in a kiss, deep and real, and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, she whispered, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Jack slipped the ring onto her finger beside the simple gold band from their midnight wedding, and Eleanor marveled at how perfect it looked, past and present united, loss and love intertwined. That night, they made love for the first time, not out of obligation or legal necessity, but because they wanted to, because they chose each other freely and completely. It was tender and awkward and perfect, and afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Eleanor finally felt whole. "Tell me what you're thinking," Jack murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I'm thinking that my father would have liked you, really liked you, not just as a ranch hand, but as a man, as his son-in-law." Eleanor smiled in the darkness. "I'm thinking that we built something real out of something desperate, and that's its own kind of miracle. I'm thinking," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion, "that I spent 3 years trying to become worthy of you, and it turns out you were worth fighting for all along. I'm thinking I'm the luckiest man alive." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time since her father's death, Eleanor's dreams were peaceful, full of golden wheat fields and laughing children, and a future that stretched out before them bright with possibility. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of rebuilding and replanning. With Blackwell's death, several of his fraudulent land claims were overturned,
and families who'd been driven off their properties began returning. Peter Hutchins reclaimed his uncle's ranch, and together he and Jack talked about forming a cattlemen's association. Neighbors working together instead of competing strengthened numbers against future would-be tyrants.
Marshall Everett closed his investigation, his final report documenting Blackwell's crimes in excruciating detail and ensuring that the dead man's legacy would be one of shame rather than power. Judge Whitmore returned to Cheyenne, but sent word that if Eleanor and Jack ever needed legal assistance, they had a friend in high places. And through it all, Eleanor and Jack continued learning each other. His preference for strong coffee at dawn, her habit of humming while she worked, the way they moved together like two parts of a well-oiled machine. They were building a marriage the way they'd rebuilt the ranch. One board, one nail, one day at a time. 6 weeks after the night attack, on a crisp December morning with snow dusting the mountains, they held their second wedding, this time in the Silver Creek Church, with Judge Potter officiating and half the territory in attendance. Eleanor wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and let out slightly to fit, and Jack wore a new suit that made him look like a gentleman instead of a gunfighter. When Potter asked if anyone objected to the union, the church was silent except for a baby's coo and the creak of old wood settling. And when Jack kissed his bride, again, for real this time, the cheers shook the rafters. At the reception afterward, held in the town hall and catered by every woman in Silver Creek who could cook, Marshall Everett raised a toast to Eleanor and Jack Rowan, who proved that courage and love can triumph over greed and violence. May their ranch prosper, may their marriage flourish, and may they never again face the kind of hell they survived together. "Hear, hear!" the crowd roared, and Eleanor felt tears stream down her face, tears of joy this time, pure and uncomplicated. As the celebration continued around them, Jack pulled Eleanor onto the dance floor for the first waltz. She'd never danced with him before, wasn't even sure he knew how, but he led with surprising grace. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked, laughing as he spun her in a circle. "My sister Rebecca taught me. Before the war, before everything went wrong. She said every gentleman needed to know how to waltz, and she wasn't taking no for an answer." Jack's smile was bittersweet with memory. "I think she'd have liked you. Would have said I married up. I think I would have liked her too." Eleanor rested her head against his shoulder. "And for the record, we married equal. Partners, remember?" "Partners," he agreed. And they danced until the stars came out and the candles burned low and the future felt limitless as the Wyoming sky. They spent their wedding night in a hotel in Silver Creek, a proper wedding night this time, without the weight of fear and violence and desperation coloring everything. In the morning, they rode back to the ranch together, and Eleanor realized with a jolt of recognition that somewhere in the past 2 months, the property had transformed from my father's ranch to our home. The transformation was subtle but complete. Jack's tools now hung beside hers in the barn. His books shared shelf space with her father's in the study. His coffee cup had its place beside hers on the morning table. They'd created a life together, messy, imperfect, born of necessity, but growing into something beautiful. As winter deepened and the ranch settled into the quiet rhythms of the cold season, Eleanor found herself thinking often about the night Silas Blackwell had first appeared on her porch with his ultimatum. If someone had told her then that she'd end up happily married to a former gunfighter, rebuilding her home, and planning for a future that included children and grandchildren and generations yet to come, she would have laughed at the impossibility of it. But impossibility, she'd learned, was just another word for something that hadn't happened yet. One evening in late December, as they sat by the fire with snow falling soft and thick outside, Jack asked her what she wanted most for their future. Eleanor thought about it seriously. "I want this ranch to thrive. I want to honor my father's memory by making this land productive and beautiful. I want children eventually. Not right away, but someday. Kids who'll run through these fields like I did, who'll learn to work hard and stand up for what's right." She paused. "And I want to grow old with you. I want 50 years of mornings watching you drink your coffee, 50 years of working this land together, 50 years of being partners in every sense of the word." Jack's eyes glistened in the firelight. "That sounds like heaven. What do you want?" "I want to be the man your father believed I could be, the man you deserve. I want to build something that lasts, not just the ranch, but a legacy.
a family, a life that proves the past doesn't have to define the future. He reached for her hand. And I want to love you better every day for the rest of my life. They made more promises that night. Not legal vows, not public declarations, but private words spoken in firelight and trust. Promises to support each other through droughts and disasters, to raise children with integrity and compassion, to protect what they'd built while remaining open to change and growth. And when spring came again, bringing green grass and new calves and the promise of renewal, Eleanor stood on her porch with Jack beside her and finally felt at peace. The scars remained, bullet holes patched but visible, memories of violence that would never fully fade. But they'd survived. More than survived. They'd thrived. The ranch that Silas Blackwell had tried to steal now belonged completely to Eleanor and Jack Rowan, paid for not in money, but in blood and courage, and the kind of love that was forged in fire and tempered by adversity. And as Eleanor watched Jack work with the new foal in the corral, his patience and gentleness a far cry from the dangerous gunfighter who'd first appeared in her life, she silently thanked her father for building something worth fighting for, and thanked whatever force had brought Jack Rowan back into her life exactly when she needed him most. They'd been pushed to the altar by desperation and violence, two strangers bound by legal necessity. But they'd chosen to stay there, chosen each other, chosen love, chosen a future built on partnership and mutual respect. And that choice, Eleanor knew, made all the difference. The choice to stay, Eleanor would learn over the years that followed, was not a single decision made once and forgotten, but rather a commitment renewed daily in 1,000 small acts of faith and perseverance. Spring melted into summer, and with it came the hard work of rebuilding not just structures but lives. The ranch demanded everything they had. Fences needed mending after the winter freeze, cattle required branding and veterinary care, fields needed plowing and planting. Jack threw himself into the work with the same intensity he'd once brought to survival, and Eleanor matched him hour for hour, sunup to sundown, until they'd collapse into bed too exhausted for anything but sleep. But in those quiet moments before unconsciousness claimed them, they'd talk about the day's challenges, about plans for tomorrow, about dreams that were slowly transforming from impossible fantasies into achievable goals. Jack wanted to expand their herd, breed better stock. Eleanor wanted to restore her mother's garden, plant roses and lilacs that would bloom every spring as a living memorial. Together they sketched out a future that honored the past while reaching toward something new. By June, the physical scars on the property had mostly healed. The rebuilt porch was actually sturdier than the original. The patched bullet holes in the siding were barely visible, and new grass had grown over the churned earth where men had died fighting over land and greed. But the emotional scars took longer to fade. Eleanor still woke sometimes in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced she heard footsteps on the porch or saw shadows moving in the moonlight. Jack would hold her through these episodes, his steady presence anchoring her until the panic subsided and reality reasserted itself. They were safe. Blackwell was dead. The danger had passed. "It gets easier," Jack told her one night after a particularly bad nightmare had left her shaking and tearful. "The memories don't disappear, but they lose their power over you. You learn to carry them without letting them carry you." "How long did it take you?" Eleanor asked, thinking of the war he rarely spoke about, the violence he'd witnessed and participated in before he was old enough to understand its true cost. "Years. Maybe I'm still learning." He stroked her hair gently. "But having you here, having something good to focus on, that helps more than anything else ever did. Turns out the best way to heal from the past is to build a future worth living." They were building that future together, brick by metaphorical brick. In July, Peter Hutchins rode over with a proposal. Several of the neighboring ranchers wanted to form a cooperative, pooling resources for expensive equipment and combining their cattle drives to Denver to negotiate better prices.